FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 401, Transaction in the Restaurant, Newcomer Report, Emergency. The French restaurant that John Rodriguez booked is called Noah, located at the foot of Beverly Hills, and is one of the most upscale French restaurants in Los Angeles. The restaurant has no obvious sign, only a small dark wooden door, which can only be found by following the valet parking service sign at the door. The interior of the restaurant is large, romantically decorated, full of artistic atmosphere, and comfortable and cozy. The entrance is like a greenhouse, and the seats are arranged under the glass ceiling. With soft lighting and elegant music, it creates a mysterious and elegant atmosphere. However, Roan did not have any artistic bacteria. When he walked into the restaurant with Mona in a red dress, he had only one feeling: expensive. Sure enough, following the waiter's instructions, when Roan and Mona walked into the depths of the restaurant, they saw dishes on the menu that cost thousands of dollars, which successfully verified Roan's guess. Deep inside the restaurant, John Rodriguez, Madeline Allen, and Caramula's family, all dressed in their best clothes, were waiting. When they saw Roan and Mona arrive, John immediately stood up and walked towards them, holding out his hand and smiling. "Good evening, Team Leader Roan, Ms. Mona." "Good evening, President John. We are not late, are we?" Roan held out his hand and shook hands with the other party. Mona also greeted Madeline Allen cheek to cheek, and then sat down next to the little girl Caramula. "Not late, we just arrived too." John smiled and replied, sitting down with Roan, exchanging a few simple pleasantries, and waving his hand to signal the waiter to serve the dishes. The dishes served were very rich, and the people at the table ate and chatted, laughing constantly. A big problem with French food is that it takes a long time. When the last dish was served, Roan, who digested food quickly, was almost hungry. After dinner, when it was time for dessert, Mona, Madeline Allen and the little girl Caramula gathered together to chat. Roan picked up his wine glass, pointed to the balcony not far away, looked at John, and said with a smile, "Let's go over there and chat." "No problem." John agreed with a smile. The two walked to the balcony with their wine glasses. Roan looked at the beautiful scenery of Bev Hill outside the window and said, "President John has gained a lot from this trip to Washington. I also want to thank Team Leader Roan for his introduction." John replied with a smile, and then said that, if there was anything he needed, he would definitely help. "There is indeed a small matter that requires President John's help." Roan didn't keep the other party in suspense after hearing this, and briefly introduced the female killer Jania, chapter 335, and the killer Spencer, chapter 333, and briefly explained the situation of the underground world in Los Angeles. John is a smart man. After listening to Roan's narration, he took a sip of the wine glass and asked, "Team Leader Roan, do you want to know the specific situation of the underground world in Los Angeles?" "Yes." Roan nodded. After learning from the two killers that his name had spread in the underground world of Los Angeles, he lacked a sense of security and had been trying to figure out the composition and details of the underground world in Los Angeles. It is not a good thing for the enemy to be in the dark and we to be in the light. He did not intend to completely destroy the underground world. Where there is demand, there is a market. It is impossible for this thing to disappear completely in the Federation. Roan only intends to figure out the composition of the underground world in Los Angeles, find some informants to help him solve the case, get information, and monitor whether anyone wants to attack him. Roan's current identity is the head of the FBI Special Investigation Team. He cannot disappear for a long time and lose contact. Lassie, Mona and Michelle cannot go undercover, and they don't have time to find out the underground world. So Roan plans to ask John, a rich man, to help him find out the composition of the underground world in Los Angeles, and then Roan will find time to talk to some people in it. "No problem." John Rodriguez agreed without hesitation. This was not difficult for him. It just so happened that he wanted to build a good relationship with Roan. Helping each other would make the relationship between the two better. Just like the theory of borrowing money, the people with the highest success rate of borrowing money are not relatives and friends, but people who have lent you money before. After the deal was settled, Ron and John clinked their glasses, smiled at each other, and drank it all in one gulp. More than half an hour later, dinner was over, and Ron and Mona left first. Because they drank some wine, they called a designated driver from the French restaurant to help drive. Returning to the rental house, Ron sat down on the sofa to rest. Mona went back to the room and changed into home clothes, then sat next to Ron, slowly squeezed into Ron's arms, and asked while watching TV, "What did you and John do when you left the table before?" "Talked about something small." Seeing that Ron didn't say anything, Mona didn't ask again, and turned the topic to Madeline Allen and her daughter Caramula. "Madeline is very uneasy now," Mona said while watching the program on TV, "because John needs to consolidate Caramula's position in the Muller Group. He often takes her around to visit the industries and companies under the Muller Group, which makes Madeline spend less and less time with Cara. In a biological sense, Cara Muller is John Rodriguez's biological daughter, and Madeline Allen is just an adopted mother. Although Madeline loves Cara very much, as Cara grows up, coupled with the wealthy Muller Group, no one knows what will happen in the future. John's goal is to help his daughter take over the part of the Muller Group that belongs to her. Madeline once only wanted her own daughter, and she didn't care about the affairs of the Muller Group." Listening to Mona's narration, Ron's expression did not change, and he did not express his own opinion. It is difficult for a judge to judge family affairs. John's family can only deal with their own affairs. Ron cannot and does not need to get involved. "Let's not talk about these things." Luo An smiled and pinched Mona's pretty face. His right hand snaked into her clothes and laughed softly. "I was cleaning the room at noon today, and I seemed to see in your bedroom." "Stop." Mona's face flushed instantly when she heard this, and she turned over and threw herself on Luo An. Luo An smiled and chose to ignore the screams in his ears and walked into her bedroom with Mona in his arms. Monday, 9 AM, Special Investigation Team, Office Area. There were 4 workstations in the office area before, one for Mona, Michelle and Lassie, and the extra one was occasionally used by the team leader Luo An, and more often used to temporarily stack documents or sundries. There were 2 more workstations in the office today. 2 new people stood in front of the whiteboard. Ron pointed at the 2 and said with a smile, "Chanel, Winslow, we are all acquaintances, so I won't introduce them in detail. The 2 new workstations will be handed over to you." Winslow smiled and waved to everyone. Chanel nodded without saying anything. Mona, Lassie and Michelle all applauded to welcome the 2. After a few simple words, Ron turned around and left the special investigation team and went to greet the team leader Pot and Burn. Michelle helped Winslow organize his personal belongings, and Lassie ran to Chanel to help. She didn't have any ideas about Chanel, but she just liked to get close to women out of habit. Half an hour later, Winslow and Chanel's personal belongings were almost organized. They were about to turn on the computer and log into the network of the special investigation team according to Mona's instructions. Suddenly, the door of the office area was pushed open from the outside. Mona, Lassie and Michelle all looked up. The 3 of them thought that Ron was returning to the special investigation team with a folder for a new case as usual. It turned out that the person who came was not Luo An, but Morton York, the leader of the 4th investigation team. He asked seriously, "Is leader Luo An in the office? I have something urgent to talk to him about." Chapter 402, Navy officer disappeared at midnight. Team leader's office. "Good morning, sir." Ron knocked on the door and entered the office. He was chatting with Potent Burn. Potent Burn helped Chanel and Winslow to be transferred to the special investigation team in such a short time. Potent Burn looked at Ron with a smile on his face, and he was more and more satisfied. A few days ago, Potent Burn and Ron had just held a press conference for the Los Angeles Council Speaker physical split case. The serial murder case with more than a dozen victims caused a great uproar among the citizens of Los Angeles. Major media outlets reported it like crazy. Now, if you leave the building and buy a newspaper on the streets of Los Angeles, you can see photos of Potent Burn and Ron Greenwood on it. The mayor of Los Angeles, the new speaker of the Los Angeles Council, and even the governor of California have expressed their views on this case and called Potent Burn to praise and encourage him. Verines, who was far away, also called to praise Roan. Mr. Clement also took the time to call Roan. While praising Roan for his good work, he also invited Roan to have a simple meal at Clement's house during the Christmas holiday. Roan accepted the invitation. He knew that this was Mr. Clement's move to win people's hearts, but he didn't mind. After all, only people with high value could be valued by the other party, not to mention that Roan's journey would definitely be smoother after this. Darn. Just when Potent Burn and Roan were chatting happily, the door of the team supervisor's office was suddenly knocked. The visitor was Morton New York, the leader of the 4th investigation team. "Good morning, sir." After entering the room, Morton New York said a few simple greetings without any nonsense, and turned his eyes directly to Roan, who was sitting on the chair, and said, "I have a case that I would like to ask Roan for help." Roan. Morton New York did not hide it, and said that the case he was talking about was a missing case. Ordinary missing cases do not require the FBI to intervene. Even if the FBI intervenes, the experienced Morton New York is capable of handling the case. But this case is different. The missing person is related to Morton New York. According to the internal regulations of the FBI, Morton New York cannot handle this case. At the end, Morton New York apologized again for the previous incident and sincerely asked Roan for help. Potent Burn, the team leader next to him, did not speak. He knew that Roan and Morton New York had a grudge before. With Roan's performance during this period, Potent Burn's heart has begun to tilt towards Roan. He now respects Roan's personal attitude. Under Morton New York's nervous gaze, Roan looked at the general information of the case, was silent for a few seconds, laughed, and looked up and said, "Okay, I can take this case, but I also want to ask team leader Morton for a favor." Roan wanted Morton New York to do the same thing as John Rodriguez, to find out the specific situation of the Los Angeles underground world. Morton New York has been in Los Angeles for a long time, and must have some understanding of the underground world of Los Angeles. When the time comes, by comparing the clues found by John Rodriguez with the clues provided by Morton New York, Roan will be able to roughly understand the true situation of the underground world of Los Angeles. No problem. Morton New York agreed without hesitation. He has seen Roan's performance during this period. While regretting his previous behavior, he has been busy building a good relationship with Roan. Morton New York also helped Roan several times in the previous cases. It was because of his current attitude and behavior that Roan chose to take this case. Then he had a brief chat with Potent Burn. After Morton New York gave him all the information about the missing case, Roan returned to the Special Investigation Team with these documents. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Lassie, Michelle and Mona are chatting with the newcomers Winslow and Chanel. Winslow is okay. He looks fierce but speaks gently. Chanel's attitude is a bit cold. It's not that she doesn't like Lassie and others, but she doesn't like to talk. She is a bit depressed. "Good morning, agents." Pushing open the door of the Special Investigation Team, Roan smiled and raised the folder in his hand, saying, "We can put aside the old times and chat, as there is still some time before Christmas, but we received new gifts in advance. I hope I don't receive this kind of gift on Christmas Day." Lassie turned her chair back to her original position and complained in a low voice. Mona next to her asked directly, "What case is it again?" "A missing case, and a missing person this time is a soldier." Passing the folder to Michelle, who distributed it to the agents, Roan turned around and posted a photo of the missing person on the whiteboard, introducing him, Peter Dawson, 45 years old, a colonel in the Federal Navy. He lost contact at around 11:30 last night and has been missing for a long time. Roan looked up at the clock and continued, 10 hours. A naval officer is missing? Looking at the folder in his hand, Lassie scratched his head. Could it be that terrorists are looking for revenge? It's also possible that he has done something, and now his identity is exposed and someone comes to his door. Roan casually replied with another guess, then tapped the whiteboard and said loudly, "Everyone, the missing person is a naval officer. There must be a lot of things in his head, and these things are most likely the targets of the kidnappers. 48 hours is the golden time for kidnapping cases, and we must find the other party within this time." Mona, Michelle, you two stay in the special investigation team and use the computer to check Peter Dawson's personal economic situation, emotional situation, recent whereabouts and other information. Lassie, Winslow, you two go to the naval base where Peter Dawson served to see if there are any clues. Chinal, you and I will go to the location where Peter Dawson last appeared yesterday to check the situation and see what the witnesses say. Okay, no problem. After receiving the exact order, a group of agents began to work according to the requirements. Two subs drove out of the parking lot and began to move quickly in two directions. The Federal Army is different from the armies of many countries. First of all, there are military bases established by the Federal Navy next to major cities in the Federation, and there are also bases in cities in some foreign countries. Secondly, the management of the Federal Army is also very lax. Whether it is a soldier or an officer, unless they make a mistake, they can leave the base for a period of time to have fun. The last place that Peter Dawson appeared before he disappeared was a bar in northern Los Angeles. Peter Dawson's car was parked at the corner of the street diagonally opposite the bar, intact, and there was no surveillance nearby. Roan and Chenia didn't find any clues here, so they pushed the door and entered the bar. I know him. He came here last night, but I didn't expect him to be a naval officer. But now I think he fits the image of a naval officer. The bar owner was a fat middle-aged woman. After seeing the photo of Peter Dawson shown by Roan, she put down the wine glass in her hand and smiled. This guy always brings a woman with him when he comes to my place, or finds a woman temporarily in the bar. After the two of them drink a little, he will take the woman straight to the motel not far away. Okay. Roan did not comment on Peter Dawson's private lifestyle. He then asked, did anything unusual happen when he was here with you last night? Indeed, there was one thing. Chapter 403, Temperamental Suspect, Clues. Hearing Roan's question, the bar owner pointed to the trash can outside the bar behind Roan and Chenia and said, this guy had a fight with a bald guy at the trash can last night. The bald guy didn't win, but he promised to bring people for revenge. Roan looked at the trash can and asked, do you have surveillance here? There is one, but the surveillance is on the bar in the main hall, and it can't reach the trash can. The bar owner chuckled, poured Roan and Chenia 2 glasses of ice water, and said, but I know who the bald guy is. His name is Nate. He is a frequent visitor here, and lives in a community not far from here. After getting the bald guy's home address, Roan chuckled and nodded with satisfaction. Thank you for your cooperation. You're welcome. The bar owner pointed to the ice water on the bar. $2. Thank you. After leaving the bar, Roan and Chenia drove to Nate's home. They didn't go far when they received a call from Mona. Peter Dawson's financial situation is very simple. The target on the other end of the phone looked at the information in the computer, spread his hands, and said, Peter Dawson has no property, has been living in the naval base, has a borrowed car, has less than $4,000 in the bank, has no extra income, and lives purely on the Navy salary. It's been a long time since I met a guy with such a simple financial situation. Luo An frowned and replied casually. The information Mona found showed that the kidnapper's goal was not for money. After thinking about it, he told Mona the information about Nat and asked her to check the other party. Not long after, Mona on the other end of the phone found the other party's brief information. Nat Norris, 38 years old, was a member of the Federal Army a year ago. Roan was a little confused. A year ago? Yes. Mona replied, a year ago, Mr. Nat swung his fist and attacked his superior, so he was expelled from the army. He has a bad temper. Thinking of the fight he had last night, Roan smiled and asked, is there any connection between him and Peter Dawson? One is in the Navy and the other is in the army. Judging from the service units alone, there is no direct connection. As soon as Mona finished speaking on the other end of the phone, Michelle's voice suddenly rang out and said, but Nat Norris's wife works as an assistant in the Navy and has a lot of phone calls and emails with Peter Dawson. There are a lot of hotel room numbers and heart-shaped patterns in the emails between the two. Okay. Roan suddenly realized that this could explain why Nat beat Peter Dawson last night. Letting Mona and Michelle continue to investigate the missing person, Roan hung up the phone, stepped on the accelerator, and soon arrived at the community where Nat Norris lived. Instead of rushing to Nat Norris's house to check the situation, Roan and Chenia first went to the community manager and asked, "Do you have surveillance here?" The community manager was a white old man in his 50s. When he saw Roan showing the FBI's golden badge, he immediately raised his hands and made a lot of gestures. Roan frowned slightly, and Chenia next to him immediately stood up and explained, "He is deaf-mute." As she said that, Chenia also raised her hands and made some gestures. Seeing this, the white old man's eyes lit up and made more gestures. The two began to communicate with each other. After a moment, Chenia turned around and said, "He said there is no surveillance here, but he met Nat Norris last night. He returned here at about 1 AM and has not left since then. But Peter Olsen lost contact at about 11:30 last night, which is more than an hour." Roan nodded, imitated Chenia and made a thank you gesture to the white old man, then turned and went upstairs to Nat Norris' room. While climbing the stairs, Roan looked at Chenia and smiled. "I didn't expect you to know sign language. I learned a little before." Chenia whispered back without further explanation. Seeing that Chanel didn't want to talk, Roan didn't ask in detail. The two of them quickly walked to the door of Nat Norris's house, took out their pistols, and stood on one side and the other side. Roan knocked on the door and shouted, "Nat Norris, are you home? There is your package downstairs." A few seconds later, a male voice that sounded like he had just woken up came from the room and asked in confusion, "Who are you? My package? Are you sure?" Roan's tone was very unhappy, and he said, "The name on the package is Nat Norris. Is this person you? If so, take it quickly. I have other packages to deliver. Don't waste my time." Fouquet. Hearing Roan's words, Nat Norris's curse suddenly rang out in the room. In less than 2 seconds, the door was opened, and Nat Norris walked out of the room with an angry face, cursing loudly, "Son of..." Before he could even utter the word, Roan reached out and quickly grabbed Nat's arm, pressing him against the wall. Chanel, who was standing next to him, pointed her gun at Nat's head and said coldly, "FBI, don't move, %." Nat Norris was stunned by the sudden situation, and after he reacted, he cursed even louder. However, Nat Norris only used a few curses, far less than Aria in. The former female agent of the 5th investigation team was shot. Chapter 212, who cursed in different ways. Grabbing Nat Norris into the room, Chanel followed closely and closed the door. Roan threw him back on the sofa and asked directly, "Stop scolding. Tell me, where is Pete Dawson?" Nat Norris was slightly stunned. "Who? Pete Dawson, the one who fought with you at the door of the bar last night." Roan shook the handcuffs in his hand and said, "We have found out about your fight with him, and we also know the relationship between him and your wife. Tell us what happened last night." "So you are talking about the guy raised by your cousin?" Nat Norris looked as if he had suddenly realized something and smiled. "You FBI came to me because he was killed, right? He deserved it." Roan and Chanel looked at each other, and they both found the hidden problem in Nat Norris's words, so they asked directly without any nonsense, "What happened last night?" Nat Norris smiled happily, picked up the water on the coffee table, and took a sip, and smiled. "A few people got off a van, and the guy who was raised by his cousin was dragged away." Before he could react, Nat Norris said that he didn't meet Peter Olsen last night, and he planned to call someone to help him, but those friends didn't pay any attention to him at all, and Nat Norris was so angry that he kicked down several trash cans on the street corners. Nat Norris couldn't swallow that breath, so he took a sip of wine, picked up a stick, and planned to attack Peter Olsen later, but he saw the scene where Peter Olsen was kidnapped by a van. Those guys are definitely not ordinary people. Nat Norris has been in the army for a few years, and he still has good eyesight. He said that those guys were agile and well trained, and they were definitely not ordinary people. As for why he didn't call the police at that time, Nat Norris laughed and said that he forgot because he was drunk at that time, but Roan and Chenia both guessed that the real reason was definitely related to Peter Olsen and Nat's wife. Chenia took out her cell phone and prepared to call Mona and asked, "What does the van look like? Did you see the license plate number?" Chapter 404, Timber Factory, found the missing person. The living room of Nat Norris's house. Now that the FBI has come to the door, it means that they have been watching Peter Olsen's case. Nat Norris has a bad temper, but he is not a fool and does not want to go against the FBI. Hearing Chenia's question, Nat Norris tilted his head and thought for a while, then said, "The other party drove too fast, and I couldn't see the license plate number clearly. But the van was grey and white, and the brand seemed to be Ford. There was a federal flag and several cartoon character stickers on it, and there were 4 or 5 people inside." Federal flag? Cartoon character stickers? Luo An frowned slightly when he heard this, and Chenia pressed the dial button and told Mona this information. Not long after, Mona's reply came from the other end of the phone. "I found the car through surveillance at a corner 4 blocks away from the bar." Good. Roan took Chenia's phone and asked, "Who is the owner of the car? Can you see what the driver looks like? Based on the license plate number." Mona on the other end of the phone replied, while typing on the keyboard, "The owner of this van is the owner of a store in northern Los Angeles, but according to the bank account, the other family recently flew out of the Federation to send their daughter to college in the United Kingdom. As for the driver, the car entered the surveillance camera from the lower corner, and I can't see the driver's appearance." "Okay, that means the car was stolen." Roan's expression did not change, and he continued to ask, "So, besides these 2 bad news, do you have any good news to tell me?" "Of course." Mona on the other end of the phone smiled and said, "After I entered the information of this car into the LAPD database, I found that a patrol officer's dashcam had captured this car last night. I checked the monitoring according to the location of the patrol officer at the time, and found that the van finally entered a wooden factory in northern Los Angeles, and never came out. And of the SUV, who took her to stop at the community, took Luo An, and took out his mobile phone and called Lisi. It's me, Luo An, how are you? I didn't find a clue related to the missing of Peterosan, but found a bit of a problem." The call on the phone said that Winslow was negotiating with the people of the Navy base. "I found a laptop at the bottom of the Peterosan's desk document. I didn't write too many English letters in the notebook, but there were a lot of neatly arranged numbers. I checked it carefully. These numbers were not Mos's password or other, but the accumulated accounts of some funds." Luo An heard a little frown. "You mean, when Peterosan was alive, he had control over a fund chain that we can't find?" "It's very likely." Thinking of what Nat Norris said before, the group that kidnapped Peterosan was not ordinary. Roan was silent for a few seconds and said, "Be careful when investigating next. You and Winslow must not act separately. If you feel that the situation is not right, stop the investigation immediately and return to the original route. If it doesn't work, remember to call for support immediately." "Understood." Lassie understood the subtext of Roan's words and nodded solemnly to agree. Roan hung up the phone and lowered his head to think. Chenia raised his mobile phone, indicating that the SWAT team had set off for northern Los Angeles. Seeing this, Roan opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat of the SUV. After Chenia fastened her seatbelt, he immediately started the SUV and rushed into the road. Half an hour later, in a wood factory in northern Los Angeles, the SWAT transport and the SUV of the Special Investigation Team arrived at the designated location. Roan and Chenia organized their weapons, turned on the communicator, and said, "The goal of this operation is to find Peterosan. The photos have been distributed to everyone. If the enemy violently counterattacks with guns, you are allowed to kill. Repeat, if the enemy violently counterattacks with guns, you are allowed to kill." "Understood." The SWAT team members agreed loudly. Roan checked the time with everyone. When the time reached the designated location, he shouted, "Begin the action." Boom. As soon as the voice fell, the ready SWAT team members immediately rushed out of the transport. After getting off the car, they immediately divided into 2 teams and rushed into the factory from the front and back doors of the wood factory. The fully armed Roan and Chenia followed the SWAT action team closely and slowly entered from the front door of the wood factory. Before entering the factory, Roan and Chenia found the Ford van in the open space outside the factory. The 2 looked at each other without saying anything and planned to go back and ask the trace inspection department to come and check. Maybe they could find some clues in the car. The lumber mill was large, but it looked like it had been shut down for a long time. The SWAT team quickly searched forward, but found no one. Roan knew that Chenia was very skilled, so he entered the mill very quickly this time, and he and the SWAT team quickly checked every room. Found the target person. Suddenly, a SWAT team member shouted from the communicator on Roan's chest, "Location D1. Found the target person." Roan and Chinia were not far from D1. Chinia immediately raised her gun and ran over when she heard the voice in the communicator, and then she saw Peter Dawson tied to a chair. The chair was a household wooden chair that could be seen everywhere in the lumber mill, and the rope used to tie the person was also a hemp rope that could be seen everywhere in the lumber mill. Peter Dawson on the chair was lowering his head and had lost his breath. Meanwhile, there were bruises and scars all over Peter Dawson's face, chest, arms, and other places. There were 2 deep cuts on his thighs, and a large pool of dark red blood flowed on the ground under the chair. Fouquet. Seeing Peter Dawson's miserable state, who was obviously tortured to death, Chanel cursed in a low voice with an ugly face. The SWAT team members had finished the operation and did not find any enemies in the factory. Chanel subconsciously turned her head to look at her side, ready to ask Roan what to do next. As a result, Chanel turned her head and found that Roan was not beside her at all, but squatting on the ground not far away, carefully picking up something. Chanel quickly walked to Roan's side and took a closer look, and then she found that what Roan was fiddling with was a toothpick. This was most likely left by the group that kidnapped Peter Dawson. Roan took out a white evidence bag, put the toothpick in it, and explained with a smile, "This factory has been closed for a long time, but this toothpick is obviously new. We'll hand it over to the trace examination department later, and maybe we can get some useful clues." Chinia nodded and walked with Roan to the chair where Peter Dawson was tied. She pointed to the wounds on Peter Dawson's legs and said, "The wounds look like military daggers. It's either like, or it's a military dagger." After taking a look at the wounds, Roan confirmed Chinia's guess, then squatted on the ground, looked up at Peter Dawson's drooping head, frowned and said, "It's obvious that this group of kidnappers are a group of guys with military backs, and they kidnapped Peter Dawson to ask him for a piece of information. Now it seems that they have a high probability of success. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 405, Emergency, Anti-Tank Missile. Chinia looked at the body on the chair, pondered for a few seconds, walked to Roan, and whispered a guess. Could it be someone in the naval base who did it? Roan was silent for a few seconds and slowly shook his head. It's possible, but not very likely. If it was someone in the naval base who did it, they have many ways to make the action more secretive, and there is no need to make it so big. But there is definitely a connection between this case and the naval base. Roan stood up, patted Chinia on the shoulder, took out his mobile phone, and called the trace examination department to ask them to handle the scene. While waiting for the trace examination department to arrive, Roan's mobile phone suddenly rang. He pressed the answer button, and Lass's voice came from the other end of the phone. "Roan, something happened. A warehouse next to a seaport in the northwest of Los Angeles." After hanging up the phone, Roan and Chinia drove here not long after. As soon as they got off the SUV, they saw an ambulance driving quickly past the two of them. Roan glanced at the bloodstains on the ground in front of the warehouse, stretched out his hand and shook hands with the middle-aged white man with a crew cut who walked in front of him and introduced himself. "Hello, Roan Greenwood, the head of the FBI Special Investigations Group." "Hello, just call me Elliot." The white man with the crew cut looked very ugly, but he still suppressed his anger and stretched out his hand to shake hands with Roan. Roan didn't waste any words and asked directly, "What's going on?" 40 minutes ago, a car stopped at the door, and someone entered the password and broke in from the gate. Elliot said that this was a temporary warehouse for storing ammunition, and the defense was not as strict as other military warehouses. Elliot pointed to the bloodstains on the ground and said, "Several intruders shot and killed the 4 sentries guarding the warehouse, and then used the password to directly enter the warehouse." The process was very fast. After finding the target, they took it and left. The whole process took less than 10 minutes. Roan and Chinia looked at each other and guessed where the intruder's password came from. looking at the warehouse, where a bunch of people were coming in and out not far away. Luo An frowned and asked, "What is missing in the warehouse?" "I don't know, I'm still screening." Elliot shook his head. The weapons in this warehouse were all prepared to be shipped to a military base outside the Federation. They were just temporarily piled here because of some problems. The weapons and equipment were very messy, and it would take some time to check them out. Luo An and Chinia were speechless about this, but the Federal Army has been in a state of chaotic management for a long time. The army itself is still very closed, and others have never been able to intervene. In the previous life, the Federal Army spent $6 million on 9 sheep, $2,800 on a USB adapter, and $700 on a coffee cup during the war. Luo An was very emotional about this. Sure enough, making money still depends on capitalist countries. He is still too young and can't grasp many things. Time passed by minute. After more than 4 hours, the list of lost items was finally listed, and Winslow and Lassie also rushed here. Not many common weapons and ammunition were lost, only 10 rifles, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, some grenades, smoke bombs and stun bombs were missing. Neither Owen nor Elliot paid attention to these things, because they both focused on the other weapon that was lost, FGM 148 shit. Son of. Seeing this string of English letters, Elliot's face suddenly became gloomy, as if water could drip out. Winslow and Chinia took a breath of cold air, and Roan's eyebrows jumped. His face looked very bad. Lassie next to him didn't see the string of letters clearly. Seeing that several people looked so bad, she whispered, "What is missing?" Roan rubbed his temples and said in a concentrated voice, "3 anti-tank missiles are missing." FGM 148, also known as Javelin, is a single-soldier anti-tank missile developed by the Federation. It is the world's first portable anti-tank missile using focal plane array technology. It has a long range and accurate strikes, and can effectively strike enemy armored targets. Moreover, the operation is very simple and brainless, just like the props in the video game. After debugging, there are only 2 steps, aim, and fire. Gift crab. Hearing Luo An's words, Lassie also took a breath of cold air. She hurriedly looked at Elliot and asked, "Don't you have surveillance here?" "There is surveillance, but it has been turned off by the intruder." Elliot's face was very ugly. He knew about Peter Dawson. Although the other party was dead now, he still had the idea of killing him in his mind. As the person in charge of this temporary warehouse, the loss of 3 anti-tank missiles was enough for Elliot to drink a pot. If the intruder succeeded in killing a bunch of people with these 3 anti-tank missiles, then he. Thinking of this, Elliot grabbed Luo An's hand. His expression was extremely sincere, and his tone was also extremely sincere. He hoped that Luo An would catch this group of people. "Okay." Luo An's mouth twitched, and he pulled his hand out of the other party's hand, and then asked, "Generally, military warehouses have backup surveillance. I need you to retrieve the surveillance before this group of people broke into the warehouse and shut down the surveillance. Maybe there will be some clues in it." "Okay, no problem." Elliot nodded and immediately led Luo An and the other 4 to the monitoring room. At 5 p.m., Luo An and others returned to the special investigation team with the surveillance. While Mona was sorting out the surveillance, Luo An stood in front of the whiteboard with a folder, summarizing the information currently obtained in this case. At 11 o'clock last night, Peter Olsen had a fight with Nat Norris at the door of the bar, and then a van drove over, and a group of people got out and quickly kidnapped him. Roan pasted Peter Olsen's photo in the center of the whiteboard, and said while summarizing the information, "This group of people drove Peter Olsen into the Idlewood factory, tortured him severely, and got the password of the warehouse from Peter Olsen, and possibly the layout of the warehouse and the specific location of the anti-tank missiles." Lassie walked to Roan, pasted the photo of FGM 148 on the whiteboard, and added, "Then this group of people broke into the warehouse this afternoon, killed the sentry, and turned off the surveillance, stole a bunch of weapons and ammunition and 3 anti-tank missiles, and finally drove away and disappeared." "That's right." Roan wrote the last line on the whiteboard, threw the whiteboard marker aside, looked back at Winslow, Chinia, Michelle, and Lassie and said, "They dared to rob a military warehouse. This group of people is very brave. Their actions throughout the case are enough to show that they are well trained and agile. They are very likely to have a military background. Our next goal is to find this group of people as soon as possible, or find out the reason why this group of people robbed the anti-tank missiles, and try not to let these 3 anti-tank missiles explode. Winslow and Chenier nodded repeatedly. The two knew the power of anti-tank missiles. It is no exaggeration to say that 3 anti-tank missiles are enough to flatten a street. Luo An looked at Michelle and asked, "How is the trace examination department?" Michelle hurried to the landline phone and said, "I don't know, I'll call and ask." "Okay." Luo An indicated to Michelle that the situation was urgent and he could urge the trace examination department a little. Then he looked at Mona and asked, "Are there any clues in the surveillance here?" Mona nodded heavily, leaned back to make room, and pointed to the computer and said, "Yes. Chapter 406 Surveillance, Clues, Suspects. Special Investigation Team, Office Area." On Mona's computer, the warehouse surveillance system synchronization backup was playing, and the scene before the group broke into the warehouse. A black MPV was seen driving quickly from a distance and stopped in front of the warehouse gate. Seeing this, the 2 sentinels immediately took out their weapons and asked each other's identity. As the sentinel finished speaking, the sliding door and window of the MPV's backseat opened, and 2 rifles with silencers stretched out from inside, killing the 2 sentinels at the same time. Seeing the sentinel fall to the ground, 5 guys in jeans plus jackets, wearing black gloves and black hoods that could not see their faces, got off the MPV together. The leading guy walked straight to the warehouse door with the password lock, entered the password and easily opened the door. At the same time, the other 2 sentinels also noticed the movement and came to check. The 2 hooded men behind the leading guy raised their guns and killed the 2 new sentinels. After the 5 people entered the warehouse area, the division of labor was very clear. 3 people went straight to the depths of the warehouse to find weapons, and 2 people went to the monitoring room to handle the monitoring. When the surveillance video did not show the scene of the weapon being taken away, the surveillance screen went black. It is not difficult to guess that the 2 guys entered the monitoring room and turned off the surveillance system at this time. A group of planned and organized guys. After watching the surveillance video, Luo An stood up straight, patted Mona on the shoulder, and asked, "Can you find the owner of this MPV?" Unfortunately, this car was also stolen by this group of people. Mona said that she had just checked the license plate of the car. The license plate was real. The owner was a female owner of a flower shop, but the other party had called the police before the case happened, saying that her car was lost, and she had a quarrel with the LAPD patrolman for this. "Congratulations to the flower shop owner, we helped her find the car, but we don't know where it is now," Luo An said casually. "It's not that there is no harvest in the surveillance video. At least now they have a general situation of this group of people, 5 people, well proportioned, and their heights are between 175 to 180. At this moment, Michelle next to him suddenly raised her hand, covered the landline phone, and said to Luo An, "The trace examination department said they have found some clues, but the report has not been written yet. If you are in a hurry, you can go downstairs to find them." "Good." Luo An nodded and signaled Mona to continue investigating the traces of the MPV, Chenier, Winslow, and Michelle to assist, and then walked out of the special investigation team with Lassie and walked into the elevator downstairs. Trace examination department. Ahmed, a white young man with long hair, was holding the autopsy record written by the forensic doctor and introduced to Ronan Lassie. The cause of Peter Ozan's death was the wound on his neck. His throat was cut open and blood poured in. Okay. Ron was not surprised at all. He had guessed this when he saw the body in the wood factory. His current goal was to find out the identity of the robbers, so he asked directly, "Are there any clues in the van?" "In the van, we only found fingerprints of the original owner's family." Ahmed put the autopsy record aside and walked to the office next door with Ronan Lassie, saying, "But there is some fresh dust on the car mats, and there are a lot of fresh ranunculus petals and barbecue sauce mixed in the dust. We checked and found that the only place that can have these 2 items at the same time is a barbecue restaurant in southern Los Angeles. The guy who drove the car must have been to that restaurant a short time before kidnapping Peter Ozan." Luo An's expression did not change after hearing this, and Lassie continued to ask, "Are there any other clues?" "And that toothpick?" In the office with a pile of various instruments, a maid picked up a transparent evidence bag, which contained the toothpick that Luo An found at the scene. A maid smiled and explained, "This toothpick should have been in someone's mouth for a long time. We found a little oral mucosa on it, and got the other party's DNA. There is no DNA sequence of this person in the FBI's internal database, so we can't find the other party directly through DNA. But if you find a suspect, you can lock him in by testing DNA." Lassie heard a smile on her face, and Luo An also took the handwritten report outline handed over by the other party with a smile, and said with a smile, "Thank you, you have worked hard. You're welcome." A maid waved his hand, then suddenly thought of something, and hurriedly picked up the autopsy record written by the forensic doctor, and added, "By the way, the forensic doctor said that judging from the 2 wound marks on the legs of the deceased Peter Dozen, the torturer should have used a SOG S-37 military dagger. In addition, there were many marks of beating on Peter Dozen's face. According to these marks, the forensic doctor judged that the finger bones of the right hand of the attacker had problems and were probably injured, which was slightly concave than that of a normal person." Luo An nodded thoughtfully, thanked him again, and returned to the special investigation team with Lassie. After getting the address of the barbecue restaurant from the trace examination department, Mona quickly retrieved the surveillance video of the barbecue restaurant. Then Mona turned back the time to the time before Peter Dozen was kidnapped, that is, before 11:30 last night. Michelle, Lassie, and Chinia assisted nearby, and soon found a white man who was suspected. Half an hour before the incident, this guy was having dinner with a white woman who looked to be in her 40s. When they were chatting happily, the white man suddenly received a call. He took the phone, and exchanged a few simple greetings. The white man apologized to the person across the table, then got up and left the restaurant. This guy's name is Kelly Hunter. He's 37 years old, and the woman opposite is his cousin. Mona's 10 fingers flew on the keyboard, and she quickly found out the identities of the two. Kelly Hunter served in the Federal Army for a long time, fought in battlefields outside the Federation, and finally left the Army due to conflicts with his superiors. Records show that Kelly Hunter's shooting performance is very good, and he has served as a sniper or observer in many operations. Looking at the photo and information of Kelly Hunter with his head raised in Mona's computer, Luo An asked, "How is his financial situation? Has anything abnormal happened recently?" Not recently. It should be said that Kelly Hunter's financial situation has always been abnormal. Michelle next to him called up Kelly Hunter's bank records and said, "This guy has a used car worth several $1,000s, no real estate, and has not submitted a tax return for 4 years. In the past 4 years, he has no work record and his bank deposits have remained at around $2,000. But he has always lived a good life. Although he is low-key, his daily performance does not look like he only has $2,000 in deposits. Either Kelly Hunter has a bank account that we don't know about yet, or he gets a sum of cash through work every once in a while." Roan laughed and expressed his guess, then patted Michelle on the shoulder and asked, "Where is this guy now?" Michelle didn't answer. Mona next to her said, "The surveillance shows that Kelly Hunter returned to his cousin's house 10 minutes ago and has not come out since." Roan looked at Mona, then at Michelle. A speechless look flashed in his eyes, then turned and walked quickly to the equipment room and said, "Chinelle, Winslow, Lassie, let's go and talk to this sniper about his tax evasion problem." Chapter 407 Arrest Operation. Crashing into a trash can. The black SUV was driving fast on the streets of Los Angeles at night. Considering that Kelly Hunter was very skilled, Roan followed the SUV closely with a SWAT vehicle to reduce the chance of an accident. This time, it was Winslow who was driving, not Roan. Lassie and Chanel were sitting in the back seat of the car checking their equipment. Roan was sitting in the passenger seat checking his equipment while talking to Mona on the phone. Mona on the other end of the phone looked at the computer in front of her and said, "I just compared the body shape, walking posture, habitual movements, etc. of Kelly Hunter and the 5 guys who robbed the warehouse. I can confirm that he is the driver responsible for driving the MPV. It's not the 2 guys who shot and killed the 4 sentinels, but one of the 2 people who entered the monitoring room and turned off the monitoring system. Well done." Luo An thought for a while and then asked, "Have you checked Kelly Hunter's interpersonal relationships?" Can you find the remaining 4 people through this method? Sorry, I can't find it. Mona in the office area of the special investigation team spread her hands and said that in the previous restaurant surveillance video, the call to Kelly Hunter was from a public phone on the streets of Los Angeles. There was no surveillance there, and she didn't know who the other party was. Because he didn't want to pay taxes, Kelly Hunter was very low-key. The interpersonal relationships that could be found were clear at a glance. He basically had no friends, and the people around him were related to his cousin Leona. Luo An didn't say anything more after hearing this. He chatted with Mona briefly for a few words, and hung up the phone. The next goal was to capture Kelly Hunter and bring him back to the special investigation team. As long as they could get him to talk, they would have a chance to find out what happened in this case. 20 minutes later, the sub and the troop carrier arrived at the community where Kelly Hunter's cousin, Leona, lived. Mona had checked Leona's personal information before. She was a manager at a turf company in Los Angeles. She was in good financial condition and had no property. She rented the small 2-story apartment she lived in. A few dozen meters away from the apartment, a SWAT team member remotely confirmed that everything was normal in the apartment through a telescope. Roan immediately decided to split up with Winslow. After receiving the news, Roan and Chanel formed a team and followed several SWAT team members to raid the front door. Winslow and Lassie formed a team and followed several SWAT team members to rush to the back door of the apartment. They also blocked the surroundings of the apartment to prevent the target person Kelly Hunter from escaping. After the plan was finalized, all parties checked their equipment again. After confirming that there were no problems, Luo An pressed the communicator and whispered, "Let's start." Bang! As soon as the voice fell, several SWAT members rushed to the apartment suddenly and quickly. The leading SWAT member took a door-breaking hammer and hit it hard, and instantly broke open the door of the apartment easily. FBI. Don't move. Go upstairs. Upstairs. The moment the door was knocked open, several SWAT members behind him quickly rushed into the apartment, shouting slogans while quickly checking every room. After finding that there was no one in the living room, kitchen, storage room, etc. on the first floor, they immediately rushed to the second floor of the apartment, followed by Luo An and others. Bang! Crash! As the leading SWAT members just walked to the second floor, Luo An and Chinia behind them were still on the stairs. There was a sound of glass breaking on the second floor, and then the shouts of SWAT members suddenly rang out outside the apartment. "He's here. Hide. Hide. The other party has a gun in his hand." Bang, bang, bang. Hearing the noise coming from outside the apartment, Roan frowned slightly, leaned on the handrail of the stairs with his right hand, turned over, and quickly jumped to the first floor. Then, in the shocked eyes of Chinia and several SWAT members, Roan disappeared instantly and rushed out of the apartment like a cheetah. "Fouquet." Chinia cursed in a low voice after being stunned for a moment and quickly turned around and ran down the stairs in 3 or 2 steps, following Roan to run out of the apartment. At the same time, Lassie and a SWAT member had already walked into the apartment from the back door of the apartment. Only Winslow and 3 SWAT members were responsible for blocking the outside of the apartment. Seeing Kelly Hunter suddenly jumping out from the second floor, Winslow and the other 4 subconsciously wanted to pull the trigger, but Kelly Hunter first fired a few shots at the location where Winslow and others were. When he jumped out from the second floor, Winslow and the others had to turn around and hide, preparing to fight back when Kelly Hunter landed and ran away. Bang! The moment he landed, Kelly Hunter took advantage of the situation and rolled forward. Seeing this, Winslow raised his gun and shot without hesitation, and the bullet successfully hit Kelly Hunter's shoulder. Kelly Hunter's reaction speed was also very fast. The moment he was shot, he had already finished rolling and was ready to get up and run away. Then, without thinking, he raised his pistol and aimed at Winslow's position. He was ready to pull the trigger and force Winslow to retreat behind the obstacle. Kelly Hunter bet that Winslow valued his life more and bought time for himself to escape. But what Kelly Hunter didn't expect was that Winslow had no intention of evading at all, but raised his pistol almost at the same time as Kelly Hunter. At this moment, the muzzles of their guns were aimed at each other. Kelly Hunter's heart was cold, and he was ready to pull the trigger without hesitation, but at this moment, a black shadow rushed towards him with a whistling wind. Kelly Hunter was shocked and turned his head subconsciously. His right hand holding the gun tilted slightly, and the muzzle of the gun aimed at Winslow could not help but tilt a little, and the root of the bullet was also deflected a lot. Winslow took advantage of the situation and squatted down to shoot, successfully hitting Kelly Hunter's right hand holding the gun. But what really made Kelly Hunter lose his resistance was not the bullet, but the black figure. Kelly Hunter saw the black figure out of the corner of his eye, and before he could react, he suddenly felt a huge force coming from his waist. The right hand hit by the bullet just felt a sharp pain, and before he could make a sound, Kelly Hunter's whole body was like a rag doll, uncontrollably flying sideways under the huge force, and hit the trash can behind the apartment heavily. Bang! The trash can instantly flipped forward, and all the garbage inside was scattered on Kelly Hunter. Grabbing the garbage off his face and throwing it aside, Kelly Hunter cursed with anger on his face. Just as his vision returned to normal, he suddenly saw a pair of big feet kicking towards his head. He fainted before he could finish his curse. Roan rushed out of the apartment like lightning, kicked Kelly Hunter away, walked to the trash can, and kicked Kelly Hunter unconscious. Chanel was dumbfounded and swallowed slowly. She had a new understanding of her team leader's skills. Winslow's eyes widened a little. He had seen Roan's speed in the previous case, but it was too dark to see clearly. Now seeing Roan's movements, Winslow found that he had underestimated him. After a simple comparison, Winslow found that in terms of speed, just like strength, he might, perhaps, probably couldn't beat Roan. After taking out handcuffs to control Kelly Hunter, Roan patted the shoulder of Winslow, who was somewhat doubtful about why he came to the special investigation team, and handed Kelly Hunter to him and Chenia, saying, "Call an ambulance and send this guy to the hospital to stop the bleeding. The two of you monitor him tonight and bring him back to the special investigation team tomorrow." "Okay, no problem." Winslow and Chenia nodded in agreement. Roan was about to continue talking when Lassie suddenly walked out of the apartment, walked towards Roan and the others with a strange look, and whispered, "Roan, I found something related to Kelly Hunter." Chapter 408 Interrogation, the sibling's child. At 8 o'clock the next morning, in the office area of the special investigation team, Winslow and Chanel were escorting Kelly Hunter from the hospital to the special investigation team. Lassie and Michelle were taking Kelly Hunter's cousin Leona from her home to the special investigation team. After hearing Lassie's words last night, Roan followed her into the apartment again. Only then did Roan have time to carefully observe the layout of the apartment, and found that the overall feeling was very warm and the feeling of home was overwhelming. Kelly Hunter's cousin Leona was standing in the bedroom on the second floor of the apartment, scolding several SWAT team members in the room. Lassie took Roan into the bathroom in the bedroom and opened the ceiling above the bathroom. There was a black suitcase in the crack in the secret compartment. When they opened it, it was filled with $1, $5, $10 and $20 old bills with non-consecutive numbers, which added up to less than $30,000. It is not difficult to guess that this money is the gains Kelly Hunter got after doing the work, as well as his daily expenses. Lassie closed the suitcase and said that it was impossible for Kelly Hunter to get so little after doing one thing. There must be other funds hidden. Luo An agreed with Lassie's opinion, but did not say much because his attention was focused on another thing. There were a lot of cosmetics for pregnant women in the bathroom, and a lot of folic acid boxes, all of which meant that Kelly Hunter's cousin Leona was pregnant. But according to the information Michelle had found before, Leona had not had a boyfriend recently, and her daily life was simple, almost going from home to work and supermarket, and she had never been to bars, nightclubs and other entertainment venues. "Roan, I found it." Just as Roan was sitting in the office area, looking down at Lassie's position to check the file records, since Kelly Hunter was born, Mona next to him suddenly reached out and patted his arm and said, "4 months ago, accompanied by Kelly Hunter, I went to a hospital in Los Angeles to do some gynecological examinations, fetal heart rate and other examinations that pregnant women need to do. I can't find out the specific results, but the surveillance records in the hospital corridor show that Kelly Hunter and Leona are very happy." The computer in front of Mona was playing the surveillance footage in the hospital corridor that day. Kelly Hunter and Leona walked out of the doctor's office with joy on their faces. Kelly Hunter first kissed Leona for a while, then squatted down and put his ear to Leona's lower abdomen. Leona gently hit his shoulder a few times, and finally Kelly Hunter hugged Leona and slowly left the hospital. So, the child in Leona's belly is Kelly Hunter's. After watching the surveillance, Luo An scratched his head with a strange look on his face. Mona next to him shrugged and said, I just checked carefully. Leona and Kelly Hunter's parents are the third generation of the Hunter family, and they are the fourth generation of the Hunter family. Although the two are siblings, they are not considered close relatives. Okay. Luo An nodded. When he checked Kelly Hunter's file just now, it showed that when Kelly was a child, his parents went to heaven in a car accident. He lived in Leona's mother's house for more than 10 years. It seems normal for the two to develop feelings over the years. At this time, Winslow and Chanel arrived at the special investigation team with Kelly Hunter. Seeing this, Roan stopped thinking about the fifth generation of the Hunter family and immediately stood up and walked into the interrogation room. In the interrogation room, Kelly Hunter, with his shoulder and right hand wrapped in bandages and his left hand tightly handcuffed on the interrogation table, sat on the chair without saying a word. No matter what Roan and Chanel asked, even when talking about the child in Leona's belly, he kept a wooden face and kept silent. He never spoke. At most, he would move a little and change his posture when he was tired of sitting. Half an hour later, the two walked out of the interrogation room without any results. Roan threw the notebook on the table, cursed in a low voice, and then picked up the teacup and drank. Chanel's face was also very ugly. As far as interrogation work is concerned, you are not afraid of being cursed, swearing, and spitting out foul language by the interrogator, but you are afraid of being interrogated without saying a word. If it is an ordinary case, you can also find a psychologist to slowly grind with the suspect and make the other party speak little by little. But now there are 3 anti-tank missiles missing in this case, and the special investigation team is not suitable for using this method. That takes a long time. Fortunately, not long after, Lassie and Michelle arrived at the special investigation team with Leona. Considering that Leona is currently pregnant, and she is not the main suspect in this case, Roan did not let Lassie and Michelle lock her up in the interrogation room, but took her to the spacious and bright conference room next to it, and also took a box of milk for Leona from Lassie's desk. Lassie. In the conference room, Roan sat opposite Leona, and Chinia sat next to Leona. Pregnant women are sensitive and easily excited. Chinia, who is also a woman, sits next to Leona, which can quickly reduce Leona's discomfort in the new environment, and can also give Leona some comfort and quickly draw closer to Leona. So the next interrogation will be mainly conducted by Chinia, and Roan will be more responsible for recording and prompting. Good morning, Ms. Leona. Chinia slowly pushed the cup of milk in front of Leona, briefly introduced the case, and whispered, do you know any clues about this matter? Leona kept tapping the cup of milk with her right hand, but didn't drink it. After a few seconds of silence, she asked, I want to know how Kelly is now. Chinia helped Leona pick up the cup of milk and replied, he is in prison now. He will face a felony charge of first-degree murder next. I'm afraid he will have to stay in prison for the rest of his life. Hearing this, Leona rubbed the cup and said with a complicated expression, he doesn't talk, right? That's right. Chinia nodded and continued, but if you cooperate with us, we can help him. Another long silence. Luo An and Chinia were not in a hurry this time, because Leona's hands were rubbing the milk cup more and more, and the changes in her eyes were gradually increasing. It was not difficult to see that she was struggling with how to choose. As time went by, Roan thought about it, wrote the word child on a piece of paper, and showed it to Chinia from a position where Leona couldn't see it. Chinia immediately understood what Roan meant, and began to talk to Leona about pregnancy, children, and the difficulties they would encounter during the two processes. Finally, Leona sighed and whispered, Kellel has been like this since he was a child. When he does something wrong, he would rather choose to be beaten and take the blame than to apologize. But this time the mistake he made was a little too big. Chinia whispered, in the Federation, it is very difficult for a woman to raise a child alone, and the child's growth cannot be separated from the father, right? You are right. Leona nodded heavily, picked up the milk, and took a sip, then said in a deep voice, I know something, and I can tell you all, but I have a condition. Chinia frowned slightly. Roan's expression remained unchanged and asked, "What condition?" Chinia thought Leona was going to say that she would help Kelly Hunter reduce his sentence or other similar conditions, but unexpectedly, Leona put the milk cup heavily on the table and said coldly, "I want to slap Kelly." Chapter 409, Poisoning. Special Investigation Team, Meeting Room. Hearing Leona's request, Chinia was somewhat confused and speechless, but she did not have the authority, so she turned her eyes to Roan. Roan thought for a moment, nodded, and said, "Okay, after we confirm that the clues you mentioned are correct, you can meet with Kelly, but we will be by your side during the meeting. Don't worry, I don't want to pass on any information to Kelly, I just want to slap him." Leona understood what Roan was worried about. She snorted and took a sip of the milk cup again. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Kelly has a friend named Alex. He and Kelly used to be in the same army. The two have a good relationship. They have been working for the same boss." Leona didn't know who the boss was. Every time Kelly contacted Alex, it was Alex. Once Kelly received a call from Alex, he would lose contact for a few days and then come back with some money. "I have a photo of Alex in my phone." Leona handed her phone to Roan, saying that she had hired someone to secretly investigate Alex because she was worried about Kelly. But the private detective she found was not good enough. Apart from Alex's photo and temporary residence, he found nothing else, wasting her money. "Okay." Roan took Leona's phone and motioned Chinia to continue asking questions. He quickly left the meeting room and handed the phone to Mona, asking her to investigate Alex. A crackling sound of keyboard tapping was heard, and Mona quickly found the other party's information. Alex Claw, 38 years old this year, served in the same team as Kelly Hunter for a period of time, and retired from the army, and returned to the Federation before Kelly Hunter. The FBI internal database shows that this guy had just returned to the Federation not long ago, and he was sent to prison for further studies for a period of time for crimes such as theft, robbery, and violent robbery. After Alex was released from prison, he is suspected of joining a criminal organization called Purple Poppy that illegally sells arms. This criminal organization is not large, with only a few people, and they act covertly. No key evidence has been found to deal with them. Now there is evidence. Luo An looked at Alex's current address on the computer, patted Mona on the shoulder with satisfaction, then turned to the others and ordered, "Lassie, Winslow, the two of you, and the SWAT team, bring Mr. Alex back. This case is likely to be done by them." "No problem. Let's go." Lassie and Winslow nodded, and immediately entered the equipment room, took their weapons, and left the special investigation team. Roan signaled Michelle and Mona to cooperate with the two remotely, and then returned to the conference room to continue questioning Leona with Chinia. Leona didn't know much, but she also knew a lot. She said that she grew up with Kelly Hunter since she was a child, and Kelly Hunter's little actions could not be hidden from her as a sister. Many times she just pretended to be stupid and was too lazy to expose Kelly Hunter. As for the relationship between Kelly Hunter and Leona as a brother and a husband, Roan, who was behind the version, thought about it briefly and threw it behind his mind. In the Federation, a country where 1 in 7 people are infected with syphilis, and 1 in 3 people have smoked suicidal drugs, this matter is nothing at all, and the reporter didn't even have the mood to pay attention to it. Leona finished narrating all the information she knew, and Chinia stayed in the conference room to accompany her. Roan went to the office area and began to check how Winslow's operation was going. Then Roan heard what Lassie asked on the phone. "Roan, there is good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?" Roan thought for a moment and replied, "Working overtime tonight, and not working overtime tonight. Which one do you choose?" Lassie on the other end of the phone was slightly stunned when she heard this, muttered a few words in a low voice, and then said, "The good news is that Winslow and I found not only Alex himself at Alex's house, but also 3 other people. One of them had a problem with his right knuckles, which was a little concave. He should be the guy who tortured and interrogated Pete Dawson. Together with Kelly Hunter, who was caught by us last night, it is basically certain that Alex and these 3 people are the ones who robbed the temporary warehouse and kidnapped Naval Officer Pete Dawson." Roan didn't feel happy when he heard this, because Lassie had said before that there was bad news. As expected, Lassie continued, but unfortunately, these 4 people are now dead in Alex's living room. Fouquet. Roan cursed in a low voice, rubbed his temples, closed his eyes and asked, what is the cause of death? There is no sign that Alex and the other 4 were shot, and there are no other scars. Roan's question fell, and Lassie's voice on the other end of the phone disappeared, and it was replaced by Winslow, who analyzed, but Alex and the other 4 had stiff limbs and distorted faces. There are still a few glasses of unfinished wine on the table. I suspect they were poisoned. Winslow stood in the house where Alex lived, looking at the 4 bodies in front of him, and guessed that there should be another person in the room at the time of the crime. This person raised a glass with Alex and the other 4, and after a brief chat, that person left first. This person either did not drink the glass of wine, or took the antidote in advance, or drank the wine and immediately went to wash his stomach. In short, this person is not dead. He deceived and killed Alex and the other 4, and finally left the scene easily. Winslow said a lot, and finally analyzed and concluded, this man should be the one who paid to buy the 3 anti-tank missiles from Alex and others. He did this either because he didn't want to pay to rob the robbers, or he wanted to kill Alex and others to silence them and erase his own traces. The 2 possibilities you mentioned are probably the plans of the mastermind. Roan sat down in Lassie's seat, rubbing his temples and said, Alex and others have always acted very cowardly. They only have some ordinary munitions in their hands, not anti-tank missiles. It should be that the mastermind paid too much this time, which aroused the greed of Alex and others, so they chose to attack the warehouse and take a risk. Winslow fell silent after hearing this. Roan's analysis made sense. If you put yourself in their shoes, there are too many benefits for the mastermind to kill Alex and others. After all, only the dead can keep secrets. Let's call the trace examination department to go to the scene later. Luo An thought for a while, and finally said, you 2 should check whether there is any surveillance in the area where Alex lives. Maybe we can find clues. Okay. Winslow agreed, and the phone was hung up. Luo An turned to look at Mona next to him and said, Mona, you should check the surveillance of that area before and after we went to arrest Kelly Hunter last night. Mona, who had been sitting next to her and listening, reacted quickly and said in an instant, you mean, the mastermind who killed Alex and 4 others also went to find Kelly Hunter last night, wanting to kill him and silence him. But he didn't succeed, because we caught Kelly Hunter in advance. That's a possibility. Luo An nodded, thought about it, stood up and took Michelle to the interrogation room again. This time, with the news that Alex and 4 others had been silenced by the mastermind, he believed that Kelly Hunter would say something. Chapter 410, Brokers for the Purchase of Anti-Tank Missiles. This was Roan's second interrogation of Kelly Hunter. It was a little different from the last interrogation. Before this interrogation, under the supervision of Chinal, Michelle and Roan, Leona and Kelly Hunter met briefly in the holding room. Seeing Leona, Kelly Hunter's eyes lit up instantly, and he hurried to the iron bars of the holding room to say something, but Leona reached her hand into the iron bars and slapped Kelly Hunter in the face, and finally turned around and left with a cold snort. Special Investigation Team, interrogation room. Kelly Hunter, who was slapped, was breathing rapidly, and his face looked terrible. Roan, who was sitting opposite him, glanced at Michelle who was ready, and said in a calm voice, I have bad news to tell you, Kelly Hunter. Your good brother Alex and several others were all killed. Kelly Hunter looked up suddenly, his eyes full of shock, but the shock quickly disappeared, replaced by a strong distrust. He suspected that the FBI was lying to him. Roan didn't waste any words when he saw this. He directly picked up the photo of the 4 people dead at the crime scene taken by Lassie and Winslow, and slowly pushed it in front of Kelly Hunter. Seeing the scene and the photo, Kelly Hunter's eyes darkened, and he raised his hands to cover his eyes with a face full of pain. You should thank us for catching you, Kelly. Roan leaned back tactically, crossed his legs, and said, if we hadn't caught you last night, the guy who killed Alex and others would have attacked you and your sister last night. I believe he must be 10 times more cruel than us. What do you think? Kelly Hunter was silent for a long time, and finally gritted his teeth and cursed, son of it. Roan didn't expect that Kelly Hunter's first words were curses, but he didn't care about it. Being able to speak was a good thing. Roan continued, now there is good news for you. The whereabouts of the 3 anti-tank missiles are still unknown. I believe you must know who the guy who killed Alex and others is, right? Kelly Hunter was silent for a few seconds, looked at Roan with red eyes, and said coldly, I want an immunity agreement. You know this is impossible. Kelly did not shoot and kill anyone in this case, but he participated in the whole process of kidnapping and robbing the arms warehouse. So Roan said, but if you are willing to explain useful information related to this case, I can help you apply for a plea agreement. The Federation is a free and democratic country. Plea agreements have an important position in federal law. It refers to an agreement reached between the defendant and the prosecutor when facing criminal charges. By admitting the crime, a series of benefits are obtained, such as commutation of sentence, probation, exemption from prosecution or reduction of criminal responsibility punishment. Okay. Kelly Hunter thought for a long time and agreed. Then he began to tell what he knew, saying, the guy who bought this batch of anti-tank missiles called himself Tom. Roan took the photo back and said, it sounds like a fake name. Yes, we think so too. Kelly Hunter said that there was a man named Kim among them. He was the boss and one of the 4 dead in the photo. Under the leadership of Jin, their small organization has always been doing acquaintance business. Tom is a new customer introduced by an acquaintance. Because of caution, Jin investigated this Tom. Kelly and others didn't know what he finally found out. Jin didn't elaborate, but just told them that the other party's identity was fine and that this was a good deal. The trust cultivated over the years made Kelly Hunter and others believe Jin's words, but Kelly now thought that Jin might have been tempted by the high price offered by the other party and selectively ignored the risks, which ended up ruining his life and the lives of Alex and others. After listening to Kelly Hunter's words, Roan asked, where did you trade the anti-tank missiles with Tom? How did you trade? I don't know. Kelly Hunter shrugged his shoulders, saying that he was responsible for driving and helping most of the time, and that Jin and Alex were always in charge of the transaction. He never asked about the details. Roan's expression did not change after hearing this, and then asked, you have seen Tom, right? Can you describe his appearance? Yes. Kelly Hunter nodded to indicate that he had no problem, and then told the location of the warehouse where their small organization stored weapons and other information. More than 2 hours later, the simulation artist made a portrait of Tom, based on Kelly Hunter's description. Roan took the portrait and asked Michelle to enter it into the computer and compare it with the FBI's internal database. Soon, Michelle and Mona found out the identity of the other party. Tom Tors, 40 years old, was a member of a certain team of the Federal Army. When he left the army and returned to the Federation, he was imprisoned for multiple injuries due to post-war syndrome and PTSD. After being released from prison, Tom Tors became a broker and middleman wandering in the black and white world, making a living by earning commissions. Chinia was a little surprised. Is he really called Tom? Tom Tors is a broker. He should not be the mastermind behind the purchase of anti-tank missiles. Roan rubbed his temples, feeling that this case was like a nesting doll, with one layer inside another. The mastermind behind the scenes was really cautious enough. Chenille followed Roan's words and analyzed. The goal of a broker is to make money. Killing people is harmful to the broker, unless he has to do it. For example, someone threatens or forces him. Roan then looked at Michelle and Mona and asked, can you find out about Tom Tors' recent situation? Sorry, I can't find out. Seeing Michelle shaking her head, Roan turned his gaze to Mona. Mona put her hands on the keyboard and typed for a while, then suddenly stopped and said, the Drug Enforcement Administration has a record showing that the second in command of a large cartel in a South American country, a guy named Bebito Hulguivita, sneaked into the Federation a few days ago. Tom Tors met with the second in command a few days ago, and then he lost his trace until he appeared in the case at Alex's house yesterday. Bebito Hulguivita is a guy with obvious mixed race features and many tattoos on his body. The records in the D show that one of the characteristics of this person's behavior is that he likes to hold other people's weaknesses hostage and threaten them to do things for him. If the job is done well, Vita is very trustworthy. Not only will he let the person go, but he will also give the other party a little money as a reward. But if the job is not done successfully, Vita is even more trustworthy and will never let anyone live to the next day. The second in command of the separatist group fits the characteristics of the mastermind very well, but I don't know why he threatened Tom Tors to help him get anti-tank missiles this time. Ron asked this guy with obvious mixed race features and many tattoos on Mona's computer, has anyone in this separatist group been arrested by the D or other law enforcement agencies? A separatist leader like Babito Holjavita would not normally risk being arrested and imprisoned to sneak into the Federation, unless there is a reason to do so, such as eliminating traitors. Mona shook her head and said, I didn't find anyone from this separatist group was arrested, but I found out another thing. Chapter 411, The Truth of the Case, Emergency, Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Hearing Mona's words, Luo An, Chinia and Michelle came to her side, and Luo An also asked, what's the matter? The boss of this monopoly group is very financially savvy. After he made a lot of money from Monopoly, he invested money all over the world and made money from legitimate businesses. Mona called up an investigation report jointly issued by the Federal Ministry of Finance and the D. This report included the specific investment situations of the major monopoly tyrants in South America and some South American countries. The report showed that the boss of the monopoly group above Vita had invested nearly $200 million in the Federation, of which $100 million were in the stock market. Some time ago, a listed company in California that Vita's boss invested heavily in was suddenly accused of falsifying the company's accounts. Not long after, it went bankrupt and its stock price plummeted. Afterwards, according to the investigation, the president of that company played some financial tricks and was imprisoned, but the money he earned had become legal on his own through some means. The president was thrown into prison, but his wife and son were safe and sound, still rich and could live a life of luxury. The money of the tyrant is not so easy to get. Looking at the white president with a big back hair in the photo, Luo An grinned and said, if you want to kidnap the mother and son for money, you don't need an anti-tank missile. Once that thing is launched, the whole villa will be reduced to ruins, and there will be nothing left of the mother and son. So, which prison is the president of the company in now? Is there any other situation? Mona quickly called up the prisoner records within the Ministry of Justice and replied, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, the president of the company and several other prisoners who were also economic crimes will be transferred from the Los Angeles temporary prison to the California state prison. There will be 5 cars guarding and following the whole process, and they are all guards and guards of the Ministry of Justice. So, Vita and others are targeting this car. Luo An took a sip of the teacup, looked up at the clock in front of the office area, and found that the time had come to 2:21 in the afternoon. Looking down, Ron carefully observed the route map of the prisoner transfer vehicle that the Ministry of Justice expected to take this afternoon. He found 2 locations suitable for ambushing and using anti-tank missiles to blow up the vehicle. He threw the pen aside, pointed to the map and said, Mona, contact the head of the marshals who transported the prisoners at the Ministry of Justice and ask them to cancel the original plan at 3 p.m. It would be best if they could make a few fake vehicles to cooperate with the operation. In addition, call Winslow and Lassie and ask them to go to location 1 on the map immediately. You will stay with the special investigation team and keep an eye on the surveillance near the 2 locations. If you find anything, contact us immediately. Chinal, call SWAT and ask them to immediately send several action teams to location 1 and location 2 respectively. You and I will go to location 2 later. Michelle, you will stay with the special investigation team and cooperate with Mona to observe the surveillance. In addition, after we leave, you will log into the FBI internal network and contact the Federal Crime Information Center, Customs and Border Protection, Department of Homeland Security, LAPD, D, Drug Enforcement Administration, and other major law enforcement departments to inform them of Babito Holjavita's personal information. Understood. No problem. Chinia, Mona and Michelle all nodded, but Michelle was a little confused about the last order. Since they had already determined the possible location of Vita and were ready to arrest him, why did they have to issue a nationwide notice of Babito Holjavita's personal information? In response to Michelle's doubts, Ron laughed and did not directly answer her. He just patted her shoulder and whispered, "During the exam, not only do you have to get the questions right, but the sound of turning the papers must be loud enough." Looking at Roan's back as he quickly left the special investigation team, Michelle's mind turned quickly, and she suddenly understood what he meant. This time the suspect was holding an anti-tank missile in his hand. The louder the sound, the bigger the case and the greater the credit. Roan left the special investigation team and did not immediately go downstairs to drive to location number 2. Instead, he turned a corner and took the elevator to the office of the team leader. The head of the special investigation team only has the authority to cooperate, contact, and exchange information clues with other law enforcement departments. He does not have the authority to order other law enforcement departments. This kind of thing still requires the team leader to come forward to contact and coordinate. In addition, Roan could not guarantee that the operation would be 100% successful. If something went wrong, someone would need to cover the bottom line, so he found the team leader Potent Burn. After all, as long as the investigation team below successfully solved the case, the team leader would get a share of the credit. If it failed, the team leader would also be blamed. Sure enough, after listening to Roan's description of the case and hearing that the other party had 3 anti-tank missiles, the team leader Potent Burn could not sit still. While quickly getting up and contacting the leader of the prisoner marshals in the Ministry of Justice, Potent Burn repeatedly emphasized to Roan that he must be careful in this operation. Anti-tank missiles are not small things. They are used to attack tanks and armored vehicles. It would be good if humans could find debris after being blown up by them. Okay. Roan nodded to Potent Burn with a serious face and then quickly turned around and went downstairs with Chinia. The president of that company and other criminals who needed to go to prison for economic crimes have recently been detained in the temporary detention prison of the Los Angeles court. The route that the marshals had planned to transfer the prisoners was very simple. They left directly from the back door of the court, turned a few streets, and entered the highway, left downtown Los Angeles via the highway, and drove straight to the California prison in the distance. Luo An thought about it from another perspective, and the best place to start on the entire route was the streets at the back door of the court. The traffic jam there was very serious on weekdays, and it was considered fast for the marshals to leave in half an hour. During this period, it was not easy to use anti-tank missiles to blow up the cars transporting prisoners. The number 1 and number 2 locations that Luo An had planned were the 2 center points of these streets. The dark Zav sped along the streets of Los Angeles at lightning speed and finally arrived at the outskirts of that area at around 2:50. As expected, due to the traffic jam, the Zav could not enter those streets, so Luo An and Chinia left the Zav and quickly walked to those streets. When the 2 arrived at the designated location, the voice of Potent Burn came from the communicator on Roan's chest. "Roan, air support will take another 5 minutes, and will be here soon." Air support is a good thing, but Roan and Chinia are in no mood to deal with it now, because in the street not far away, a prison van carrying prisoners was stuck in the middle of the road, and there were several prisoners in prison uniforms inside, and it was not a fake car in disguise. "Fouquet." Roan cursed in a low voice and quickly ran to the prison van with Chinia, took out the golden badge to show his identity, and asked, "What's the matter with this car?" The leading black marshal said that after receiving the notice from the FBI, his boss ordered them to set off early to avoid encountering the enemy, but they didn't expect that there was still a traffic jam. As for the enemy having anti-tank missiles, the black marshal spread his hands and repeated his superior's words to the 2 of them. "What if it's fake?" Chinia's face completely sank when she heard that, and she almost couldn't control her anger and started cursing. Roan narrowed his eyes slightly, held Chinia down, and didn't say much. He just left the prison van, pressed the communicator, and asked, "Winslow, Lassie, where are you now?" "We have arrived at the designated location." As soon as Lassie finished speaking, Winslow's voice suddenly rang out. "The target person appears. I found him." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 412. The enemies upstairs were suppressed by firepower. Los Angeles Court, on the street behind the door. While Ron and Chanel were talking to the Black Bailiff, Winslow and Lassie were looking for traces of Bebito, Holjavita and others. Winslow had seen how anti-tank missiles were used. After he and Lassie arrived at location 1, they kept carefully observing the nearby high-rise buildings. Winslow did not see any suspicious people on the high-rise building, but he found a man carrying a huge black suitcase under an office building not far away, and there was another man holding a large pair of pliers next to him. After cutting the lock on the door, the guy with the pliers pulled the door open, and the guy with the suitcase hurried into the building. The guy behind him then threw the pliers away and followed him into the building. The large suitcase was far larger than the normal size, but it could just hold an anti-tank missile. In addition, the two people were carrying two black backpacks on their backs. The experienced Winslow could tell at a glance that the two black backpacks contained rifles. Winslow did not hesitate to see this. He quickly called Lassie over, and the two of them quickly ran to the door across the street that had been cut off. At the same time, he quickly pressed the communicator and told Ron that he had found the enemy. Be careful. Ron emphasized in the communicator that Winslow and Lassie must pay attention to their own safety, and then quickly contacted the SWAT team and asked them to go to the location Winslow mentioned for support. Ron himself did not plan to go to location number 1 to support Winslow, because when the Black Marshal was still complaining to Chinia about what happened today, he found 4 guys with black backpacks outside the first floor of the parking lot of the building across the street. Ron also saw that the 4 people's black backpacks were all loaded with rifles. Not only that, 2 of them were carrying 2 large black suitcases. I also found the enemy here. Seeing the 4 people enter the interior of the building in an instant, Ron immediately pulled Chinia and ran in that direction. While quickly jumping forward on the hood of the blocked car, Ron pressed the communicator and described the location of the 4 people to another SWAT team, asking them to rush to the scene for support. Understood. The 4 fully armed SWAT teams were divided into 2 parts. One rushed to Winslow and Lassie's location number 1, and the other quickly went to the location Ron mentioned for support. There was an elevator and stairs in the parking lot of the building diagonally opposite the court. When Ron and Chinia entered the first floor, they happened to see the elevator closing. Looking at the symbol of the elevator slowly going up, Chinia's face was full of anxiety. She was about to turn around and run to the stairs not far away. Seeing this, Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly, grabbed her first, and said, "Focus on the 3rd and 4th floors. These 2 floors have the best angles to attack the prisoner van with anti-tank missiles. These 4 people are likely to go to these 2 floors." Okay. Chinia nodded subconsciously in response, and then suddenly realized something. Just as she was about to turn around and ask, Luo An continued, "You go left, and I go right. I'll go up the stairs on the right. When you find the enemy later, don't act rashly. Remember to report the location to SWAT first." After that, Luo An turned around quickly, stepped on the ground with his right foot, and instantly ran to the stairs a little further to the right at a very fast speed. Seeing that Luo An ran to the stairs in the blink of an eye, Chinia's eyes widened for a moment, but this was not the time to be surprised. Chinia hurriedly followed the plan made by Luo An and quickly climbed up the stairs on her side. On the right staircase, Luo An took 2 steps at a time and quickly went upstairs. At the same time, he opened the system page in his mind, quickly took out a bottle of hemostatic potion, a bottle of swift potion, a bottle of physical potion and a bottle of painkiller, and poured them all into his stomach in one breath. With the blessing of physical potion and swift potion, Luo An's speed increased a little bit, and soon arrived at the 3rd floor of the parking lot. He rushed into the 3rd floor with a weapon in a vigilant posture and checked around. He didn't find the 4 people. Luo An quickly turned back and ran back to the stairs to the 4th floor. At the same time, he pressed the communicator and said, "Chanel, there is no one on the 3rd floor. Go directly to the 4th floor." Chanel, who had just run to the 2.5 floors, was stunned for a moment, and a flash of surprise flashed in her eyes, but she quickly pressed the communicator and agreed. Understood. Chanel's voice fell, and just as she ran to the 3rd floor, she suddenly heard fierce gunfire from upstairs. Bang, bang, bang. Chinia took a breath and quickly pressed the communicator to call SWAT. She reported her location and asked them to hurry to the scene. At the same time, she hurried to speed up to the 4th floor. On the other side, a few seconds ago, as expected by Luo An, he found the 4 enemies on the 4th floor. One of them was wearing a black suit jacket, standing at the edge of the building looking out, and a guy in a brown leather jacket was standing next to him sorting his backpack. The other 2 sturdy guys in black leather jackets were squatting on the ground, opening a large suitcase and taking out cylindrical metal tubes. The 2 metal tubes were the FGM-148 Javelin anti-tank missiles that were lost before. At this time, there were many cars parked on the 4th floor of the parking lot. Luo An bent down and approached the 4 enemies quickly with his weapon. He glanced outside the parking lot and found that he was right opposite the prison van. Winslow and Lassie were rushing to the back of the prison van. It was obvious that Bebito Holjavita and his gang were planning to attack the prison van from the front and back, leaving no chance for the van or passers-by near it. Ding-ling-ling. Suddenly, the man in the black suit jacket's phone rang. He had just picked up the phone, but before he could press the answer button, Roan, who was behind a car in the distance, immediately stood up, raised his pistol, aimed at the 2 men, and pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. Roan's shooting was very accurate, and he successfully hit the heads of the man in the black suit and the man in the brown leather jacket. As the 2 men fell to the ground, one of the 2 men in the black leather jackets who reacted immediately took out a rifle from the black backpack next to him, with a ferocious look on his face, and shot at Roan like crazy, as if the bullets were free. Bang 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 bang. A series of bullets instantly shattered the glass and tires of the passerby's car, leaving a pair of craters and bullet marks on the surface of the car. Roan quickly bent down and moved back to avoid the bullets. The other guy in the black leather jacket took advantage of his teammates attacking Roan and sped up the action of opening the Javelin anti-tank missile. Before launching the Javelin anti-tank missile, it is necessary to search for the enemy and retrieve the target through an optical sight or an infrared thermal imager. It can only be launched after locking the enemy. The missile will match the infrared features that have been locked and track the enemy until it hits the enemy. At this time, 2 of the 4 people in the group had been killed by Roan, and one was busy using a rifle to attack Roan. The guy who was fiddling with the anti-tank missile became more and more anxious and chaotic. At this time, Chinia also ran down the stairs to the 4th floor of the parking lot. Bang 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 bang. The guy with the rifle was using the rifle to suppress Roan at this time, and at the same time, walk towards Roan's position little by little. Because of the obstruction of passers-by and cars, Chinia, who rushed to the 4th floor, did not see the guy fiddling with the anti-tank missile at the first time, but directly saw the black jacket man who was holding a rifle to suppress Roan with firepower, and the whole person was facing away from her. Chinia did not hesitate, raised the gun, and pulled the trigger at the other's back. At the same time, Roan also took out 2 stun grenades from his waist. Chapter 413 Missile Launch. Missing Luo An. Bang, 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 bang. On the 4th floor of the parking lot, gunshots rang out. A guy in a black leather jacket was holding a rifle, slowly walking towards Roan with a ferocious face. Bang, bang, bang. Chinia fired several shots. 2 bullets missed, but more bullets hit the back of the black leather jacket. Feeling the pain from his back, the sturdy man in the black leather jacket roared, turned around desperately, aimed the rifle at Chinia, and pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. Chinia, who reacted quickly, immediately turned sideways and returned to the stairs to avoid the bullets. The black leather jacket man endured the pain and was about to move forward when he suddenly saw a black object flying beside him from the corner of his eye. A trace of doubt flashed through the black leather jacket man's mind, and he wanted to see what the object was. The next second, a dazzling white flash instantly flashed in front of his eyes, followed by a deafening explosion. The black leather jacket sturdy man who had been hit by a bullet only felt a shock coming, and then fell to the ground uncontrollably and lost consciousness. Roan, who had knocked down the enemy with a stun grenade, walked out from behind the car and glanced at the man in the black leather jacket lying on the ground. Knowing the importance of reshooting, he aimed at the other party and pulled the trigger again. Bang! The sound of the gun fell, and the strong man on the ground shook and stopped moving. At the same time, the remaining enemy suddenly stood up from behind the car not far away. He aimed a drone with a huge cannon on his shoulder and shouted with a ferocious face, "Fuck you." Bang, 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 bang. The moment the strong man stood up, Roan did not hesitate and immediately raised the muzzle of the gun, aimed at the other party, and pulled the trigger. Chinia on the other side also walked out of the stairs and fired a bullet at the strong man's back. Both bullets hit the enemy. Several blood flowers splattered on the strong man's body, and his legs softened and fell forward to the ground, but at the last second, he still triggered the launch button of the anti-tank missile. Swish. One of the biggest features of the FGM-148 Javelin anti-tank missile is that the missile head will automatically chase the enemy after it is launched, so even if the operator falls, a flame will still burst out from behind the missile head and fly straight towards Roan. Seeing this scene, Chinia's pupils suddenly shrank and her face changed drastically. She screamed and raised her weapon, frantically pulling the trigger at the missile head in an attempt to blow it up. Roan's face also changed when he saw this scene, and he turned around and ran. In the blink of an eye, he ran into the staircase where he had just walked upstairs. The Javelin anti-tank missile head has the function of locking the enemy and tracking, but it does not have the ability to turn at right angles. As soon as Roan's figure disappeared at the staircase, it hit the wall of the staircase. Boom. A terrifying explosion suddenly exploded. The wall disappeared in an instant. Cement bricks flew everywhere. A burst of black and grey smoke filled the surroundings, and the whole building seemed to shake. Chinia, with a pale face, ran to the explosion site. At this time, the stairs were gone, and the place was in a mess. There was only a big empty hole in front of her. Because of the black and grey smoke, she couldn't see the details inside. Chinia's legs went soft, and she lay down beside the big hole, shouting, "Roan. Team leader Roan. Where are you? Answer me." At the same time, such a loud explosion was deafening, resounding through the ears of everyone around. The Black Marshal shook his body and cursed, and the passers-by on the ground screamed and fled everywhere, even the cars blocking the road. Not far away, Winslow and Lassie had already successfully killed the other two before they took out the anti-tank missiles. Hearing such a loud explosion, the two of them felt a little nervous, looked at each other, and quickly pressed the communicator to contact Roan. Roan. Team leader Roan. Can you hear me? Team leader Roan. Seeing no one answering on the communicator, Lassie and Winslow's faces suddenly became extremely ugly. They quickly stood up and ran to location 2 while they quickly contacted Chinal. "Chinal, are you there? Can you hear me?" "I'm here." Chinal, with red eyes, asked the ambulance to come to the scene as soon as possible, and at the same time, she was running from the other side of the stairs to the 3rd floor, ready to go there to find Roan. Hearing the voice of the communicator, Chinal slapped herself hard, forced herself to calm down, and then answered. 4 enemies have been successfully killed. The anti-tank missile exploded, and team leader Roan's whereabouts are unknown. Winslow's face turned pale when he heard this, and he didn't say much, but he ran to location 1 a few points faster. Lassie felt that her eyes went black, and then she ran again like Winslow, and kept cursing at the group of unconscious enemies. On the other side, the team leader Potent Burn received the news of Roan's disappearance, immediately threw the pen aside, and walked out of the room with a stern face. Mona, who stayed in the special investigation team, heard the news, and her nails turned white. Without saying a word, she ran away from the special investigation team. Michelle's face also sank. Seeing Mona running out of the office area, she quickly got up and chased after her. Michelle knew that Mona would definitely drive to the scene now, but she was afraid that Mona would drive too fast because of her excitement, so she planned to grab Mona's steering wheel and let her drive. When everyone was anxiously looking for Roan took a breath repeatedly on the traffic-congested street behind the parking lot and struggled to get up from the ground little by little. When he saw the anti-tank missile head flying towards him, Roan was sure that he could not move from the 4th floor stairs to the 1st floor in a short time. So Roan, who knew the power of the warhead explosion, did not hesitate and directly flipped out from the window on the middle staircase between the 3rd and 4th floors. Luo An had observed the surroundings before going upstairs. He remembered that the street behind the building was jammed with traffic just like the court in front. If he jumped out from the 3rd floor, he would fall on a car instead of falling directly to the ground. As it turned out, Luo An's guess was very accurate. After he jumped out of the window, he did hit a passerby's car hard and then fell on the road. But Luo An underestimated the impact of jumping from 3.5 floors. The roof of the passerby's car was directly dented by the fully armed Luo An. Luo An also felt that his internal organs were not right and his bones seemed to be broken. Because he drank painkillers beforehand, Luo An was not unable to move due to severe pain. The good news is that Luo An stood up without much effort and time. The bad news is that now, except for the left hand that he can see, he can't be sure whether other parts of his body are injured. He can only feel that some places are not quite right compared to the past. Hearing Janelle's loud shouts from upstairs, Luo An wanted to answer the communicator, but found that the communicator was broken and his cell phone was lost when he jumped off the building. Standing on the street and shouting was not a good idea, so Luo An wiped the blood off his face, knocked on the dented passenger door of the car next to him, looked at the young couple in the car through the broken glass window, smiled what he thought was a friendly smile, and said, "Hello, FBI, can I borrow your cell phone?" The girl in the passenger seat with a terrified face. The boy in the main driver's seat plus the car owner, $% at. Chapter 414 Hospital, Luo An's injury. In the parking lot of the building next to the Los Angeles court, there is a big pit in the middle of the stairs on the 4th floor. A thick black and gray smoke can be seen from a distance. On the road behind the parking lot of the building, there is a black car with a big dent on the roof. Luo An is very handsome. The few streaks of blood on his face at this time not only do not make people feel hideous, but give people an indescribable sense of handsomeness. The girl in the co-pilot of the car was still in shock, but when she saw Luo An talking to her with a smile, her eyes lit up, and she subconsciously took out her mobile phone and handed it to Luo An. The boy in the driver's seat of the car was also startled, seeing that his girlfriend was staring at Luo An, and the new car that he had just bought was hit by Luo An. The boy's face flushed, and his anger surged up instantly. He opened the car door and ran straight to Luo An, angrily saying, "Son of, hey, this is my new car, you damn guy." Luo An told the boy that someone would deal with his car, then took the phone from the girl and immediately called Chinya. At this time, Chinya's eyes were red, and she was squatting in the concrete ruins on the 3rd floor of the parking lot, searching. When she heard the ringing of her phone, she pressed the answer button, her voice a little hoarse. "I'm Chinya." The young boy felt that Luo An was evading him, and his anger was getting bigger and bigger. When he saw his girlfriend get out of the car and asked him not to disturb Luo An, his anger instantly rushed to the boy's head. He raised his hand to grab Luo An's shoulder and twisted it back hard, trying to make Luo An turn around and listen to him. "It's me, Luo An, I'm fine." Luo An moved to the left to avoid the boy's hand and said to Chinya, "I'm on the road behind the parking lot. I'm a little injured now. Please help me contact an ambulance." The painkiller was very effective. Luo An couldn't feel any pain in his body now, but he must have been injured in the car that had made such a big hole. It would be right to go to the hospital for a checkup. This case was so big. Killing the enemy without any injury and successfully killing the enemy with serious injuries. The former can certainly gain admiration from others, but the latter can get greater credit. The crying child gets the milk. This saying is applicable everywhere. Beside him, the boy became even angrier when he saw that Luo An still ignored him. When he heard his girlfriend start to scold him, the boy's eyes instantly turned red, and he raised his fist and hit Luo An without caring. Feeling the wind coming from behind him, Luo An turned around and raised his hand to easily block the boy's fist, then twisted the boy's arm behind his back, and finally pushed hard, easily pressing the boy on the hood of the car. On the other side, Chinya was stunned when she heard Luo An's voice. She was ecstatic when she heard the news that Luo An was still alive. But when she heard Luo An's words that she should call an ambulance, Chinya's heart skipped a beat again. She quickly got up and ran to the edge of the 3rd floor to look down and asked quickly, "I'll call an ambulance for you right away. Where are you injured? Are you shot?" After a few seconds, Chinya couldn't say anything more. She stuck her head out from the edge of the building and looked down. She just happened to see Luo An easily pressing the boy on the hood of the car. Chanel. Downstairs, the girl looked at Luo An with a worried look on her face. Luo An gave her a reassuring look, saying that he would not do anything to her boyfriend. Then he picked up the phone and answered Chanel's words. Don't ask so many questions. Hurry up and call an ambulance for me. I'm seriously injured. The girl was at a loss. The boy cursed even louder when he heard this. Chanel upstairs twitched her mouth and nodded. Okay. Chanel hung up the phone and quickly told the ambulance that had arrived at the scene where Luo An was at this time. Then she ran downstairs while pressing the communicator to tell Winslow, Lassie and others that they had found Luo An. Winslow, Lassie and others were immediately happy when they heard this, and then they quickly asked Luo An where he was injured, where he was lying now, and whether anyone gave him first aid. Chanel was speechless. She opened her mouth and didn't know what to say. She could only vaguely say that she didn't know either, and she was rushing to Luo An. On the other side, after Chanel hung up the phone, Roan did not return the phone to the girl immediately, but continued to call Mona. Knowing Mona's temper, Roan was also worried that she would recklessly race on the streets of Los Angeles. Mona's driving skills were average, and Roan knew that she was fine, and he didn't want Mona to end up in the hospital. In the distance on the streets of Los Angeles, and Sav was driving fast. The driver was Michelle, and Mona was sitting in the passenger seat. At the critical moment, Mona still listened to Michelle and gave her the steering wheel. Chanel explained the news that Roan was found to the communicator. Mona and Michelle also heard it. They were relieved, but still very nervous because Chanel hesitated and didn't say what the situation of Roan's injury was. Before Mona could ask more questions, her cell phone suddenly rang. Luo An on the other end of the phone smiled and comforted her. It's me, Luo An. Don't worry, I'm fine. Fuck you. Luo An. Hearing Luo An's relaxed tone that was exactly the same as before, Mona couldn't hold back her anger and cursed loudly, then continued to ask anxiously, where are you injured? Is it serious? Is there bleeding? I'm injured, but not seriously, and there's no bleeding at the moment. Luo An didn't care about Mona scolding him. Knowing that the other party cared about him, he smiled and answered each of her questions one by one. A few seconds later, he looked up and saw Chenia, Winslow, Lacey, and several doctors carrying a stretcher not far away. Roan said a few words and hung up the phone, then returned the phone to the girl, released the boy he was holding, and said, hey, my team will be here later. Leave your personal information and we will deal with your car later. After that, Roan took a few steps back, sat on the ground, leaned back, closed his eyes, and lay on the ground. The girl who took the phone back was speechless when she saw this scene. The boy who finally climbed up from the hood had a red face. The first thing he did when he got up was to kick Roan on the ground. Seeing this scene, Winslow and Lacey, who were not far away, immediately took out their pistols and shouted, don't move. Put your hands up. The boy's movements froze in place. $$ at Chenia. Half an hour later, Roan was sent to the hospital's operating room. According to the doctor's examination, Roan had fractures in his left leg and right shoulder, bruises and shrapnel scratches on his back, some damage to his internal organs due to the violent vibration, and a fracture in his left arm. The injuries were serious, but not particularly serious. After all, there were no fatal injuries. However, at the request of the head of the FBI Special Investigations Group, and for the sake of check, when Roan was pushed out of the operating room, his upper body had been wrapped in bandages by the doctor like a mummy, and the examination results also showed several more fatal injuries. In the ward, Winslow, Lassie, and Chanel looked at each other when they learned of Roan's true injuries, who was half a mummy on the bed. What do you know? Selectively ignoring Mona's roll of eyes, Roan smiled and took a sip of the water she fed him. Just as he was about to speak, Michelle suddenly pushed the door open and said, Roan, the team leader is here. Chapter 415, Case Finale, Harvest, heading to Boston. Hospital, ward. With the arrival of team leader Potent Burn, Mona, Winslow and other team members walked out of the ward and went to the corridor to chat in low voices. Your special investigation team has made a big noise this time. Potent Burn entered the ward and was shocked to see Roan, who was tangled like a half mummy. After chatting with Roan for a few words, and finding that he was seriously injured but mentally clear, he breathed a sigh of relief and said, "The location where the anti-tank missile exploded has been surrounded by several helicopters from Los Angeles media. Since the 9/11 incident, the people of the Federation have been on high alert about explosions. The billowing smoke caused by the explosion of the anti-tank missile made many people on the streets of Los Angeles wonder if terrorists have turned their attention to Los Angeles." Roan smiled and said in a hoarse voice, "I wish the missile hadn't exploded. I thought so too, but those media would like 2 more missiles to explode." Potent Bine poured himself a glass of water and drank it all, then said, "Roan, you did a very good job this time. The mayor of Los Angeles and the director of the Los Angeles branch of the FBI both called me to praise your special investigation team." Potent Bine was very moved and praised Roan for a long time. Finally, he coughed lightly and whispered, "A reporter will contact you tomorrow morning for an exclusive interview. Her father works in the FBI, so you don't have to worry." Seeing the look that Potent Bine gave him, Roan immediately understood what the other party meant. After agreeing with a smile, he asked, "Sir, those cars in the parking lot." When Roan and Chinia were exchanging fire with the 4 men, there were many cars parked on the 4th floor of the parking lot, and many of them were riddled with bullet craters and holes. The anti-tank missile exploded, and a big hole collapsed on the 4th floor. A bunch of cars turned into fragments and fell to the 3rd floor of the parking lot with cement bricks, smashing a bunch of cars parked in the parking lot on the 3rd floor. The total loss of these cars is not a small number. "It's okay, I will handle this matter." Potent Burn's face twitched slightly when he heard Luo An mention this matter. However, the experienced Potent Burn was not panicked. It was impossible to pay for compensation, and it was impossible in this life. The FBI could help those car owners contact the insurance company and help them urge the insurance company to pay the compensation. As for some car owners who did not buy insurance, it was not the FBI's problem. In the free, democratic and thrilling federal life, if you don't buy insurance for your car, what does it have to do with the federal law enforcement department if something happens? The federal government treats everyone equally, but some people are more equal. After listening to Potent Burn's words, Luo An was silent, and his heart was more certain of his practice of using public cars for private purposes. The two continued chatting for a while, and Roan suddenly remembered something and said, "Sir, I want to take a vacation for a while." He was injured now, so he could take this opportunity to rest for a while and go out with Mona to enjoy the rotten and impetuous capitalist life of the Federation. As for the injuries on his body, Roan was not panicked at all. He would recover, almost as long as he drank a few more bottles of physical potions. No problem. Potent Burn agreed without thinking. Roan was injured now, and he needed to recuperate and receive psychological counseling. Christmas was coming in a few days, and he heard that Roan had not returned to Boston to visit his deceased parents for a long time, so Potent Burn waved his hand and gave Roan a 6-month deadline, letting him figure it out by himself. Potent Burn left the ward, and Roan, who had been given a full 6 months of free time, did not smile, but frowned and pondered. Roan Greenwood's deceased parents had always been suppressed in his heart and selectively ignored by Roan, but today Potent Burn's words still evoked memories of this matter in Roan's mind. More than half an hour later, Winslow, Lassie, Chinelle, and Michelle left the wood one after another. Roan looked at Mona, who was helping him organize his personal belongings. He was silent for a few seconds, talked to her about the half-year vacation, and then said, "Mona, come with me to Boston in a few days. Escape is never a solution to a problem, and it's time to go to Boston with Mona." When she first heard Roan talk about the half-year vacation, Mona smiled and happily thought about how to arrange this time. But when she heard Roan was going to take her to see Roan's deceased parents, Mona suddenly fell silent. Seeing this, Luo An's eyebrows moved slightly, and he stretched out his hand to hold Mona, and whispered, "What's wrong?" "Nothing, it's just a little sudden. I'm a little surprised." Mona was silent for a long time, then stood up and leaned in front of Luo An, lowered her head and bit Luo An's lips, and whispered, "I love you, Luo An." Just as he was about to answer Mona's words, Luo An suddenly felt something moving below him. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he whispered, "Mona, my left leg is broken now, but there is nothing I can do. It's okay, you don't have to move." Mona bit Luo An's lips hard, then stood up and left the bed, walked to the door of the ward, locked it, and pulled the curtains on the door. In the next few days, Luo An first lay on the bed and accepted the interview with the reporter mentioned by the team leader Potentbein. The female reporter was from the Los Angeles Times, with high professional quality and beautiful people. During the whole interview, the other party never asked Luo An questions that embarrassed him or made him unwilling to answer. Afterwards, the column written by the female reporter in the newspaper also perfectly reflected Luo An's handsome humor, courage, and strategy. The only problem was that the female reporter looked at Roan with a strange look in her eyes. If Mona hadn't been standing at the door with a cold face, she would have helped Roan change the bandage. Afterwards, the female reporter secretly gave Roan a business card, but Mona tore it up and flushed it into the toilet. Team leader Roan was hospitalized, but the special investigation team's work could not be stopped. Lassie and Michelle stayed in the special investigation team and carefully handled the follow-up of the documents of the missing Navy officer case. Chanel and Winslow spent some time to find Tom Tors, the broker who killed and silenced the witnesses. As expected by everyone, the reason why Tom Tors killed and silenced the witnesses was indeed because he was threatened. Babito Howell gave it as men imprisoned Tom Tors' daughter and asked Tom Tors to do something for him, otherwise he would kill the girl. The main participants in the whole case, Tom Tors and Kelly Hunter, were sent to a temporary prison to wait for the court trial. Babito Howell gave it and others were all dead and sent to the morgue. Under Michelle's leadership, the special investigation team spent several days processing the file report, and the case was finally completely closed. Roan returned to the special investigation team in a wheelchair with a bandage on his left hand. He took out a folder from the team leader's office and asked Michelle to distribute it to everyone. The folder contained the bonuses that the agents received after handling the case. $2,000 each, and a notice issued by Roan that the special investigation team would be on vacation for the next 2 months. Lassie happily praised Roan for his handsomeness and his heart, and Michelle was also a little happy. Winslow and Chanel, who had just joined the special investigation team not long ago, looked at each other and said nothing more. In the previous serial murder case, both of them received a large bonus from Roan, which was a big bonus for them. Now that Christmas is coming soon, both of them are planning for the next holiday. The next day, the special investigation team officially started their holiday life. Mona and Roan, who was on crutches, boarded a plane to Boston together. Chapter 416. Luo An, feeling the joy of money power. Brookline, Boston, Massachusetts. This area is one of the most popular towns in Massachusetts and is a well-known gathering place for high-quality school districts in the United States. Harvard University and Massachusetts Institute of Technology are across the river from this area. A certain president of the Federation with a wild imagination once attended a private high school in this area. Roan's parents' house is in this area, but because the real estate prices in this area are high, after his mother's sudden death, Roan, who has not yet gone to college, has no ability to pay the high inheritance tax, so the tall villa was naturally taken away by the Boston government for auction. Arriving in Boston by plane with Mona, Roan learned that the current owner of the villa went bankrupt 6 months ago and was listing the villa for sale. Roan did not hesitate and immediately contacted the agent to buy the villa again at a cost of more than $6 million. The interior decoration of the villa is no longer what Roan had imagined in his mind. Fortunately, before Roan had to move out of the villa, he had rented a long-term warehouse in the suburbs of Boston and put all his parents' relics, personal belongings and his own personal belongings in it. At that time, Luo An also took a lot of photos of the previous layout of the villa. After buying the property, Luo An immediately contacted the construction team and asked them to redecorate the villa according to the layout in the photos. With the help of money, the construction team took less than a week to perfectly replicate the decoration in the photos. Luo An was very moved by this. He finally felt the happiness of Batman. Christmas is one of the traditional festivals of the Federation. Tonight, in addition to the warm decoration in the past, there is also a Christmas tree in the center of the hall in this villa. The tree is decorated with various candles, Colorful flowers, toys, stars, and various Christmas gifts. The Christmas tree was purchased and decorated by Luo An and Mona. The two were making dinner in the kitchen at this time. Mona's laughter was crisp and pleasant, and Luo An's face was also full of smiles. Okay, stop making trouble. Sniffing her nose, Mona smelled the burnt smell in the air. Her face changed. She pushed Luo An away, who was entangled with her, ran to the oven, and opened the oven door. A black turkey appeared in front of her. Damn it. Mona took out the burnt turkey, took off her gloves, and threw them at Luo An, angrily saying, "It's all your fault. We don't have dinner tonight. It's gone, so it's gone." Luo An raised his hand, and easily caught the gloves flying in the air, put them aside, and smiled. "Let's go out and eat directly." Luo An can make some oriental dishes, but he really can't cook western turkey, so he had to leave it to Mona. Mona can make some fast food, and she has only a vague idea of how to cook turkey. Before cooking, she deliberately took a few packages of gifts, and went to the neighbor's house to ask for advice. But when he looked back, and saw Mona holding a bunch of messy things with strange smells, and stuffing them into the turkey's stomach, Luo An made up his mind that he would never eat this turkey tonight, so he deliberately pestered Mona just now. Mona wrinkled her nose, walked to Luo An, and looked at him carefully. Seeing that Luo An's expression did not change at all, she snorted and nodded in agreement. "Okay, I'll go upstairs to change clothes." After that, Mona slapped Luo An's butt hard, and then ran to the stairs with a smile. "You dare to hit me?" Luo An grinned, turned around and shouted with his crutches, "Don't run, let me fight back." "I won't." Luo An drank a lot of physical potions these days, and all the wounds on his body have healed. His fractured left leg and shoulder have almost healed, and his fractured left arm is also healing quickly. But in order not to attract attention, Luo An still leaned on crutches, and his left arm was always tied with plaster and hung in front of his chest. Women always spend some time on their clothes and faces when they go out. After more than an hour, Luo An and Mona drove out of the villa and went to a restaurant that Luo An used his money ability again to book. Luo An can now feel more and more how useful money ability is in the Federation. Apart from spending money, the rest is happiness. This time, it was not Roan who drove but Mona, and the car was an orange Dodge Hellcat sports car. Roan had never driven a sports car except for the explosion. Roan wanted to know what it felt like to drive a sports car with one hand, so he bought the cat directly. But because his left arm was really tied with plaster and could not move, Mona had to drive for a while. But, in front of a famous restaurant in Boston, the orange Hellcat attracted a lot of passers-by's attention. Mona, who was wearing a silver dress and had a curvy figure, opened the car door and got out of the car, then walked to the passenger seat and opened the door, stretched out her hand to Roan, raised her head and said, "We're here, dear." Looking up, looking at Mona, who was snickering like a little fox who had successfully stolen a chicken, Roan's eyes flashed with a hint of speechlessness, but he didn't say much. He handed his hand to Mona and stood up from the passenger seat. Amid the envious, jealous, and hateful looks from passers-by, Luo An stood up and pulled Mona into his arms. He lowered his head and bit her lips, then whispered in Mona's ear, "I'll take care of you after dinner." It's still unclear who will take care of whom. Mona bit Luo An's ear in return, chuckled, threw the car keys to the doorman next to her, and took Luo An into the restaurant. Not long after they sat down at the reserved seat, several dishes were served on the table. Luo An picked up a piece of turkey and tasted it, and then never touched that dish again. Luo An felt that it was very dry and unpalatable, but Mona felt that it was good, and ate with relish. Taking a sip of the red wine, Roan grabbed the object that was rubbing against his calf, clamped it between his legs, and said in a low voice, "Today is Christmas. I wonder how the other members of the special investigation team are doing." Mona's expression was slightly stiff. She pulled hard, but couldn't get away. She simply stopped struggling and replied, "I called them this morning." As usual, everyone had their own things to do. Michelle stayed alone in the rental house to read, but bought a turkey for dinner at the restaurant. Lass's phone was very noisy. She said there was a party tonight, and there were many young girls. She planned to make an effort tonight, and get 2 or 3 to spend Christmas with her tonight. Chanel didn't have many relatives and friends in Los Angeles. The next day, after she got the holiday, she flew directly back to her parents' home in Mississippi and spent Christmas with her parents. Winslow had been married before and had an ex-wife and a young son. His ex-wife has now formed a new family with someone else. Fortunately, Winslow and his ex-wife had a good relationship. He played happily with his son during the day on Christmas. In the evening, he bought a lot of gifts for his son with the bonus he received from the special investigation team, and then sent his son back to his ex-wife. As for Christmas night, Winslow recently met a female owner of a coffee shop, and they made an appointment to have dinner together tonight. As they were talking, Mona's fork suddenly fell on the plate with a ding-dong sound. She looked at Luo An unnaturally, her face slightly red, showing her little tiger teeth, and whispered, "Luo An." Seeing that Mona seemed to want to bite him to death, Luo An laughed, stopped and began to taste the dishes normally. There is also a Christmas hat as a custom on Christmas. It is a red hat. It is said that wearing it to sleep at night will not only make you sleep well and feel a little warm, but you will also find a little gift from your loved one in the hat the next day. Luo An and Mona both prepared gifts for each other, but they did not intend to wait until the next day to see them. After dinner, they returned to the villa to rest for a while, and then they began to check what gifts the other party gave them. Chapter 417 Christmas Bells, Casino, and Sudden Stalking. Boston, Brookline area, a villa. On the second floor of the villa, Mona opened the Christmas hat and found a wooden box inside. Opening the box, there was another small box inside. Mona was a little speechless and continued to open the small box. Inside, this time it was not a small box, but 2 tickets to Las Vegas and a hotel suite reservation. Some time ago, when Mona and Luo An were watching a movie together in the cinema, she said that she wanted to go to Las Vegas to see the local customs there. It happened that Luo An didn't know what Christmas gift to give Mona, and he also wanted to go to Las Vegas to take a look and verify a certain guess of his, so he booked these 2 tickets. Mona also remembered this incident and suddenly exclaimed with a smile on her face, shouting to the outside of the room, "Luo An, thank you for your gift. I like it very much." Hearing Mona's shout, Luo An, who was sitting on the sofa on the first floor of the villa, laughed and lowered his head to open the Christmas hat that Mona gave him. There are quite a lot of things in this Christmas hat, including a long pink rope with bells, a foldable deer antler headdress, and a bag of drugs. Looking at these 3 items, Luo An's eyes suddenly showed a gleam of light. He didn't understand what Mona meant. He got up from the sofa, picked up the 3 things, and ran to the second floor of the villa with a cane. At this time, one of the classic Christmas songs was playing in the villa, Jingle Bells. The jingle bells of the horses make people feel so happy. We are so happy to ski tonight and sing skiing songs. Las Vegas, also known as the gambling city and the world's entertainment capital, is the largest city in the federal state of Nevada and one of the 4 largest gambling cities in the world. It is a world-renowned resort city for tourism, shopping, and vacation centered on the gambling industry. It has the reputation of the world's entertainment capital and the wedding capital. Among the tourists who come to Las Vegas every year, most of them come to shop and enjoy food, and only a few come to gamble. Ron and Mona were no exception. The 2 flew here the second week after Christmas. After a short rest at the hotel, they headed straight to Las Vegas Boulevard, walking along the boulevard, shopping, playing, and eating and drinking in every place. But when you come to Las Vegas, how can you not go to the casino? Ron wanted to verify some of his ideas, so he suggested to Mona to go to the casino for a little fun. No. Mona rejected Luo An's proposal with a serious face and said in a serious voice, "Luo An, I know you have made a lot of money during this period, but that money is nothing at the gambling table. Gambling is addictive, but gamblers will not have a good ending." "Thank you, Mona, I know." Seeing that Mona's eyes were full of worry, Luo An, who knew that she cared about him, stood up and kissed Mona for a moment, and then said seriously, "Believe in my control, Mona, I will never get drunk." Mona shook her head repeatedly when she heard it. Just as she was about to continue speaking, Luo An then proposed an idea. "How about this? I will only take a little money this time. If we lose it all, we will leave the casino and never go again, okay?" "Okay." Mona frowned and pondered for a few seconds, nodded, and then said, then it's $1,000. Luo An was speechless and proposed, $100,000. No. Mona refused loudly, $10,000. No more. Seeing Mona staring at him fiercely, Luo An sighed, nodded and agreed, okay, just $10,000. Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas is one of the famous hotels and casinos. Luo An exchanged $10,000 for a bunch of chips ranging from $1 to $500 and walked into the depths of the casino with Mona and found a Texas Hold'em table and sat down. Picking up a $1 chip and looking at it, Luo An felt as if he had embarrassed those seniors who went to the casino and easily took millions or tens of millions. Mona casually called a waiter to exchange the chips for a glass of wine and stood behind Luo An and watched without saying a word. There were 5 players on this gambling table, including Luo An, 2 men and women dressed as tourists, a white uncle who looked like he was in his 40s with a sad face, and a white young man who looked around with a curious look on his face. The chips of the 4 people were between $5,000 and $10,000. After playing a few games, Luo An didn't find anyone pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger. After thinking about it, it was normal. After all, the bottom bet of this table was too low. How could anyone with ability come to this kind of card table to play? Because he didn't know the rules of Texas Hold'em at first, Luo An lost more than $6,000 after a few games. Mona behind him didn't change her expression. She knew this would happen and was thinking about where to eat after the game. At this time, a new group of people had come to the table. The 2 tourists and the uncle each won a little money and left the table immediately. The white young man with a curious face lost more than Luo An. He originally had $10,000 in chips, but now he only had 2,000. He was no longer curious as before. He was breathing very fast, his eyes were red, and he kept urging Luo An and the other 3 newcomers to open their cards. Luo An rested his hand on his chin and did not open his cards immediately. Instead, he turned around and patted Mona. Give me a sip of wine. Oh, here you go. Mona was stunned for a moment, then handed the wine glass to Luo An. Luo An took the wine glass and drank it all. He changed his posture and began to turn over his cards. It was 2 club J's, a heart J, a heart K and a spade K. This hand is called a full in Texas Hold'em. It is not the biggest card, but it is bigger than all the cards of other people at the gambling table. Therefore, Luo An successfully won back $3,000. Fouquet. Bang. The white young man's card was just a little smaller than Luo An's. In this wave, he completely lost his remaining $2,000. After slamming the table hard, he glared at Luo An and turned away from the table. The other people who lost their cards also looked at Luo An and turned away. Luo An smiled nonchalantly. He had roughly confirmed his guess, so he threw a $50 chip to the dealer and also stood up and left the table. Mona followed closely, looking at the more than $6,000 in chips in Luo An's hand. She asked with a smile, is it over? Let's go eat. No, wait for me for a while. Luo An smiled and shook his head. Before Mona could get angry, he continued to ask, by the way, which restaurant do you want to go to? How much does it cost to eat? Mona was stunned for a moment and replied, it's the seafood barbecue buffet next door. $500 is enough for the 2 of us. Okay, we'll go if we win $10,500. Luo An smiled and nodded and took Mona to another card table not far away. What? Before Mona could come to her senses, Luo An had already sat down at another Texas Hold'em table. Mona was very angry when she realized what was happening, but seeing that Luo An had already started a new round of cards, she suppressed her anger and prepared to discuss this matter with him after Luo An lost all his money. But what Mona didn't expect was that after several rounds of cards, Luo An lost first and then won, and actually got back the original $10,000 and even won more than $2,000. Leaving the card table and walking out, Luo An threw the chips to Mona and said with a smile, we won't have a buffet tonight, let's go to a more expensive place. Mona took the chips and was shocked. She whispered, how did you do that? Luo An smiled and pointed to his head without saying anything. It's not that Luo An can see through other people's cards, but because of long-term training and use of the emotional perception in his mind. After the last case was over, he discovered a new function. Mona thought Luo An pointed to his head to brag about his good memory. Just as she was about to speak, Luo An suddenly pulled Mona and walked quickly to a slot machine next to him and whispered, "Someone is following us." Mona's face changed slightly. The gambler who lost money just now. Or someone from the casino? Luo An frowned slightly, was silent for a few seconds, and said, "It's not the people you said. The other party is a woman, and I don't know if I saw it wrong. Her face looks a bit like you." Mona. "Sorry, I temporarily modified the driving content. The review is really getting stricter and stricter." Chapter 418. Luo An, you want to call the police? I'm the FBI. Las Vegas, Caesar's Palace Casino. Behind a slot machine, Luo An hung his fake injured left hand in front of his chest, held Mona with his right hand, bowed his head, and pretended to kiss her, but in fact he was observing the situation on the other side through the reflection of the colorful glass on the pillar next to him. Just now at the gambling table, Luo An had been using the ability of emotional perception. By comparing the emotions that others would have when seeing a certain suit of cards, he compared his own cards with those of the other party, first guessed and then verified, and achieved the result of losing first and then winning. During this period, because there were too many people in the casino and the gambler's mental fluctuations were too great, Luo An only used emotional perception on his own card table in order not to be distracted by others, and ignored other passers-by. But when the gambling ended, and Luo An took Mona away, the emotional perception in his mind suddenly found that someone began to follow him, and the other party's emotions were very complicated, with warmth and coldness coexisting, with both good feelings and rejection. Luo An was a little confused about this, but pretended not to know. When he threw the chips to Mona, he looked back calmly through the colorful glass that can be seen everywhere in the casino, and found that the other party was a young woman dressed as a tourist, holding a glass of wine to cover her face, and wearing black framed glasses. Behind the slot machine, Mona looked puzzled when she heard Luo An's words. "You said she looks a bit like me. Are you sure?" "Sure." Luo An frowned slightly. After he and Mona came to the slot machine, the emotional perception in his mind found that the other party paused for a moment, then turned and left, and soon exceeded the range of emotional perception, and disappeared among the gamblers. Mona wanted to ask something else. Luo An thought for a while, raised a finger to cover her mouth, and whispered, "Pretend that this has never happened. Let's go to eat. There are too many people in the casino, so it's not easy to do it. That person will definitely come later." "Okay." Seeing the look Luo An gave her, Mona nodded and smiled again, pulling Luo An out, laughing and discussing with Luo An what she wanted to eat later. Las Vegas is a large tourist city with countless restaurants. In order to entertain ordinary tourists, the prices of dishes are generally not very high, and most of them cost from a few dollars to more than $100. Luo An just won more than $2,000 in the casino. This time, he and Mona did not go to those ordinary restaurants, but went to a very famous steak restaurant to see and eat a few pieces of standard steaks without antibiotics and hormones. Luo An could not taste the difference between these steaks and ordinary steaks sold outside. In fact, because the chef used molecular cooking methods, Luo An chewed hard for a few times and felt that they were not as delicious as those steaks sold outside. However, the beef ribs, shrimp cold cuts, and raw oysters in this restaurant are very good, which attracted Luo An to eat a lot. After dinner, Luo An and Mona walked slowly to the hotel where they lived, while touring the brightly lit night scene of Las Vegas Boulevard. The road was calm, and Luo An did not find the person following them, as if that person had completely given up on this matter. Walking all the way to the parking lot of the hotel where the two lived, Mona breathed a sigh of relief. She raised her head and was about to tell Luo An what she thought, but Luo An suddenly frowned, pressed Mona's slender waist lightly, then pulled Mona to lean against a parked red car, lowered his head and kissed her. Mona was stunned for a moment, but subconsciously responded. Under Luo An's guidance, the two of them entangled and gradually moved to the driver's seat of the car. Suddenly, Luo An pinched Mona's waist lightly, and Mona's expression instantly became clear. Without waiting for her to ask, Luo An pushed her aside and then opened the driver's door of the red car and pulled out a young woman. The young woman was wearing a red backless long skirt with a curvy figure, slender legs, and an indescribable temperament. The young woman who was suddenly dragged out of the car screamed in surprise, but Luo An ignored her. He clamped her thigh with his right leg and pinched her arms with his right hand, pressing her to the ground. The two of them turned their backs to Mona. Luo An said coldly, "Mona, go and look through her handbag." Since entering the parking lot, Luo An felt the same emotional fluctuations as when he was in the casino, and as he and Mona got closer, the emotional fluctuations became stronger and stronger. The other person was obviously the same person who followed them in the casino. Okay. The woman's face was facing away from Mona, and Mona didn't see her face clearly. After hearing Luo An's words, Mona hurried to the driver's seat of the car to look for her bag. The woman who was pinned down by Roan screamed, "Damn it. I'm calling the police. You two robbers." Roan chuckled, glanced at the young woman's long legs calmly, and said with a smile, "I'm the FBI. You can tell me if you have anything." The young woman. Mona quickly found the other person's handbag in the car. In the bag was a folding dagger, a pistol, 3 photos of Roan and more than a dozen photos of Mona. Mona didn't care too much about these things. All her attention was attracted by the woman's driver's license and passport. The name on the driver's license was Celeste, and the name on the passport was Carol. It was not difficult to guess that these were 2 fake names. But the 2 documents showed the face of the same woman, and the face of this woman was very similar to Mona. Mona's pupils shrank, and she quickly got out of the car and walked to the front of Luo An and the woman. She squatted down and saw that the other person's face was almost 50% similar to hers. Mona's face was cold as hell, and she asked in a serious voice, "Who are you?" The young woman glanced at Mona, took a deep breath, and said, "Let me go first. I have no ill will towards you. But the things in your bag don't seem to mean that." Luo An clamped the young woman's hands with his right hand, bent down, picked up the pistol with his left hand that was pretending to be injured and not healed yet, and smiled. "For self-defense? This is the Federation. How can a woman protect herself without a gun?" The young woman had reasons and evidence, and Mona's face became even gloomier. "Answer me, who are you?" The young woman struggled, looked up at Mona's face in front of her, which was 50% similar to her own, was silent for a few seconds, and said the same thing, "Let me go, and I will tell you." Mona was about to ask when Luo An suddenly heard the voice of a security guard not far away, so he threw the handbag to Mona, and then knocked the young woman unconscious. Standing up and carrying the other person on his shoulders, Roan said, "Someone is coming. Go back to the room first and ask later." "Okay." Mona nodded, followed Roan, and went through the back door of the hotel to avoid passers-by and secretly returned to the hotel room where the two lived. In the room, Roan tore the curtains and tied the young woman to the chair. Mona was more direct and took some water from the bathroom and splashed it on the young woman's face. Wow. The young woman woke up instantly. Roan sat aside and studied the items in the handbag. Mona had a cold face, her hands folded in front of her chest, and still asked the same question. "Tell me, who are you?" "Damn it." The young woman opened her eyes and saw that she was tied to the chair. She cursed in a low voice, first glanced at Roan, then looked at Mona, stared at Mona's eyes, and answered, "My name is Caroline. Caroline Evans." Hearing this name, Roan paused, frowned, and looked at the young woman, because Mona's full name is Mona Evans. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 419 Mona Evans, Caroline Evans. On the 10th floor of a hotel in Las Vegas, in the living room of a suite, a woman in a red backless dress was tied to a chair. Her 2 slender legs were very eye-catching. The hair on her forehead was messed up by the water, and the makeup on her face was also soaked by the water. The pretty face that was 50% similar to Mona not only did not become ugly because of the makeup, but became more attractive. "You said your name is Caroline Evans?" Looking at the silent Mona, Luo An asked in a serious tone, "What is your relationship with Javarie Evans?" Javarie Evans is Mona's biological father who she has rarely seen for many years. Chapter 49. Here's my father. Caroline did not look at Roan, but stared at Mona, and answered the question. "So, Mona Evans, you should call me sister." Impossible. This time, without waiting for Roan to speak, Mona also stared at Caroline and said, "I don't have any sisters. My mother only gave birth to me. I'm very sure of this." Caroline's face is very similar to Mona's. People who don't know her will definitely think that she and Mona are twins. But when Mona sorted out her mother's belongings, she saw the hospital test report when her mother was pregnant, the hospital's opening certificate when she gave birth, and other documents, which all showed that Mona's mother was only pregnant with Mona. Caroline twisted a few times, changed to a more comfortable position, and said in a calm voice, "It has nothing to do with your mother. I'm your father's adopted child." Caroline said that, when she was 7 years old, she was abducted to Western Europe by human traffickers. After Javarie Evans led the team to destroy the criminal organization, he saw that she looked very similar to Mona when she was a child, so he began to help her contact her family. "But my biological parents died in the war, so your father adopted me," Caroline said calmly, to satisfy his father's love for his daughter who could not return to the Federation and see him. Mona said nothing with a wooden face. Without waiting for Roan to continue asking questions, Caroline continued to stare at Mona and said, "Your father sent me to a down and out noble family in Europe and funded my schooling. I learned piano, violin, ballet, German, English, French, Japanese, Chinese and even Latin. When I was 18 years old, he also paid for me to open a piano store." At the end, Caroline smiled and said in a firm voice, "Of course, I will also attend some banquets when our father needs me, help him get some information, and be a social light in name only, but a spy in reality." Fouquet. After listening to Caroline's description, Mona looked at her eyes in silence for a long time, cursed in a low voice, left the living room, walked into the bedroom, and started typing on her laptop. After taking a look at Mona's back, Roan pulled her chair and sat opposite Caroline and asked with a smile, "So, you don't live in Europe, why come to the Federation to find us?" Roan did not comment on Javarie Evans's behavior, he just wanted to find out why Caroline followed them. Seeing Roan sitting in front of her, the coldness on Caroline's face disappeared, replaced by a beautiful smile, and said, "Roan Greenwood, the head of the Special Investigation Team of the FBI Los Angeles branch, is young and promising, handsome, agile, and a rising star of the FBI." Roan smiled and waved his hand, indicating that these compliments should be said more truthfully. He loves to hear it. Caroline was slightly stunned, then rolled her eyes lightly and concluded, "And he is very thick-skinned, and has no gentlemanly manners." The so-called gentlemanly manners are nothing more than a hypocritical surface of some people, to cover up their barbaric ignorance and to do whatever it takes for the sake of profit. Luo An spread his hands and smiled, "I treat my friends well, and my enemies badly. It doesn't matter to me whether the enemy is male or female. So you don't have to try to stand on the moral high ground and pressure me with words. It's useless. I don't care." Caroline raised her eyebrows. "What you call not caring about morality includes your girlfriend being next to you, but you are staring at other women's thighs? And this woman is your girlfriend's sister? Wow, this is an accusation that will scare a man." Luo An stared at Caroline for a moment and smiled. "Caroline, you are a very beautiful woman." "Thank you. But you are very uneasy inside." Luo An leaned back in his chair and said, "If what you just described is true, then you must have been very scared all these years, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of being abandoned again. That's why you suppressed yourself and studied hard, just to show your useful side. You are very beautiful, and there is no shortage of male pursuit during this period, but you don't know how you will be arranged. A woman's first time is sometimes very useful, so you rejected those men. During this period, you found that the best way to quickly and successfully reject a man who pursues you is to show your aggressiveness. Over time, whenever you find that a man makes you feel uneasy and troublesome, you will subconsciously show your aggressiveness to make yourself look less weak, right? looking at Roan with a smile in front of her. Caroline's face stiffened slightly, and she was silent for a few seconds before smiling again. It seems that team leader Greenwood is a very confident man. Only at certain times. Roan poured a glass of water, brought it to Kerala's mouth, and helped her drink a sip, then said, although it is very unfair, in this world, many times women cannot solve problems on their own. Sometimes it is the right thing to do to show your weak side appropriately, and it will not make people look down on you. After drinking the water, Caroline stared at Roan with her eyes and smiled softly. Is this why Mona likes you? You will always protect her from the wind and rain? Seeing the glimmer in Caroline's eyes, Roan smiled and did not answer. He put the cup aside and said, don't beat around the bush. Just tell me what happened to you in Europe. Caroline was silent for a while and said, Mona's father and I are missing. In the bedroom, Mona, who had been listening to the conversation in the living room, paused, frowned, and then the keyboard tapping sound became faster than before. Roan's expression changed slightly and asked, what happened specifically? I don't know. Caroline shook her head, saying that Jory Evans would call her every 2 or 3 days. If he had time during holidays, they would have a meal together. If he didn't have time, he would call to explain the situation. This had never stopped for many years. But since Christmas night, Jory Evans had lost contact. No matter whether Caroline used her own mobile phone, hidden numbers or other backup methods, she could not contact him. Even the men of Jory Evans, whom Caroline knew, disappeared without a trace, as if they had evaporated from the face of the earth. Just when Caroline was at a loss, she suddenly received a package from Jory Evans. At this moment, Mona came over with the laptop, glanced at Caroline, then turned her eyes to Roan, and said with a complicated expression, I have checked her identity, and there is no problem so far, and I can't contact my father now. Okay. Roan nodded, and then asked, what's in the package? Caroline sighed and told Roan what was in the package. Roan frowned, and Mona's face instantly sank. Chapter 420, Mona's father's disappearance and broken hand incident. Las Vegas, a room on the 10th floor of a hotel. Mona had just checked Caroline's personal information on the computer, and the content displayed on it matched what Caroline said, so Mona temporarily determined that Caroline was telling the truth, and did not lie to them. Hearing Roan's question, Caroline sighed and said, in the package is a severed hand and a note. Through a small scar on the severed hand, I recognized it as my father Jory's left hand. There was only one word help on the note. Hearing that Jory Evans' left hand was cut off, Roan remained silent. Mona's face turned very ugly. After thinking about it, she asked in a serious tone, why don't you contact the CIA? How can I contact the CIA? Caroline asked back, I have never contacted other CIAs besides my father in these years, and I have never seen those people. And my intuition tells me that there is something wrong with the letter. Caroline said that, if the package was mailed by her father himself, why did he put the severed hand in and cut it off to prove his identity? Isn't this method too violent? Jory could have written a little thing that only he and Caroline knew about to prove his identity. I don't know who to ask for help. Caroline glanced at Roan, stared at Mona, and said, my father mentioned you to me before, saying that he had a daughter in the Federation who made him worry and joined the FBI. Since you are in the FBI, you must have more connections and methods than me. I came to the Federation this time, just to tell you this news. As for whether to avenge my father, and how to avenge him, this matter is up to you to decide. I really want to avenge my father, but my ability is really limited, and I can't do it. Looking at the face in front of her, that was 50% similar to hers, Mona breathed quickly, and clenched her teeth. After a few seconds of silence, she suddenly stood up, and walked behind Caroline, pulling the chair tied to the other person, and walked to the bathroom. Caroline, who was tied to the chair, was shocked and shouted, wait, what are you going to do? I told you to stay in the bathroom for a while. Mona locked Caroline in the chair in the bathroom with a cold face, and then returned to the living room, hugged Roan tightly, her eyes red, and trembled as she whispered, Roan, what should I do? Mona is not a particularly opinionated person. Many times she took the initiative to do something, because something forced her. For example, she became an FBI because she knew that her father Javeri was a CIA, and Mona joined to retaliate against him. She also has superb computer skills. When the two of them were resting and talking after a workout, Roan learned that Mona was mocked and despised by a computer-savvy classmate when she was in school. In order to slap her back, she worked hard to study computer hacking technology. Mona's feelings for her father Javeri Evans have always been very complicated. Because Jolie seldom went home to see Mona, Mona was often scolded by her classmates as a fatherless child. Moreover, Jolie did not even visit her mother when she was dying in bed, which made Mona hate him very much. But on the other hand, Jolie has been Mona's source of income for many years. If it were not for that money, Mona would not have the money to buy a cemetery for her mother, to keep the house left by her mother, and to finish college without taking out a high loan. Just now, Caroline said in a roundabout way that Mona was Jolie's favorite daughter, and he did not return to the Federation just because he was afraid that danger would affect his daughter. These words made Mona feel even more entangled. Caressing Mona's back, Roan tilted his head and kissed her face gently. When Mona stopped trembling, Roan was silent for a few seconds and said, "Let's go to Europe together." After listening to Caroline's words, Roan also found that the package was strange. It was impossible for Javeri Evans, who had worked in the CIA for so many years, to do such a contradictory thing. It was not clear what the truth behind the package was, but there was a problem in front of Roan. Caroline was Javeri's adopted daughter. It had been exposed. In addition, Caroline came to the Federation to find Mona. Whether Caroline's identity was true or false, it meant that Mona and Roan's identities had been targeted by someone. Escape could not solve the problem. No one could guard against thieves for 1,000 days. Instead of sitting at home and waiting for the enemy to attack him, or waiting for the enemy to trip him up secretly, it was better to go to Europe to investigate the situation and face the difficulties. Hearing Luo An's words, Mona was silent for a few seconds, tilted her head and bit Luo An's lips fiercely, kissed Luo An for a while like crazy. She leaned close to Luo An's ear and whispered, "If we can come back alive this time, you stop, stop, stop." Hearing this, Luo An's back was instantly covered with cold sweat, and he quickly raised his hand to cover Mona's mouth, to stop her from setting a flag for herself. Mona's eyes widened, at a loss. Luo An sighed speechlessly, and said, "We will definitely come back alive this time. Don't say such things in the future." Mona didn't understand why, but she nodded, and Luo An took his hand away from her mouth. "Hello." At this moment, Caroline's voice came from the bathroom. "Have you finished discussing? Can you let me go? I need to solve a personal problem." Roan did not answer, but looked down at Mona. Mona looked at the bathroom, then looked at Roan, snorted, and whispered, "That's a bad woman. Stay away from her, okay?" Roan smiled and nodded in agreement. Mona walked into the bathroom and let Caroline go. After Caroline solved her personal conflict, Mona glanced at Caroline's alluring red backless long dress. She thought about it, found a new set of clothes she had just bought and had not worn yet from the bedroom, and asked Caroline to change into them. A moment later, looking at Caroline who was sitting opposite him, wearing sunglasses, long sleeves, long pants and a jacket, covering herself tightly, Roan glanced speechlessly at Mona who was sitting next to him. Without saying much, he coughed lightly and asked, "Caroline, where did you put the box that was mailed to you?" "In my music store." Caroline told the specific location of the box. When she learned that Roan and Mona were going to Europe to investigate the matter, she said in shock, "Aren't you going to ask someone for help? The fewer people who know about this kind of thing, the better." Roan looked at Caroline meaningfully. Of course, he couldn't do it alone, but he didn't plan to tell her what to do next, because he still couldn't trust her 100%. Looking at Roan on the left and Mona on the right, who was following Roan's instructions in the specific investigation process, Caroline's mouth twitched, and she swallowed her saliva. "You two are really crazy." "Okay, I can go crazy with you. When do we leave?" "No hurry." Roan shook his head and continued to ask Caroline a few questions, and then said, "Before going to Europe, we need to go to Maine, which is in the upper right corner of the Federation." "What? Why?" Hearing this, not only Caroline was puzzled, but Mona also showed a puzzled look. Roan laughed and handed a Federal Geographic magazine to the two of them, explaining, because Maine is vast and sparsely populated, with a high forest coverage rate, and it is very close to California. X2. Chapter 421 Arrival in Europe, Broken Hand DNA, Rich Widow. A week later, Roan, who had changed his hairstyle and dressed like a tourist, and Mona and Caroline, who also wore sunglasses and dressed like tourists, walked down from a cruise ship from the UK to Germany. When it was confirmed that he would go to Europe that day, Roan did not choose to take a plane directly, but took some money and went to the underground world of Las Vegas to get some fake documents for himself, Mona and Caroline. Then Roan took the two girls to Maine, rented a car, bought some camping supplies, and drove the two girls into the deep mountains and forests of Maine. In a ravine not too far from California, Roan hid the car, took Mona and Caroline to sneak into California, and then took a cruise ship to the UK and California, and finally arrived in Germany, where Caroline had been. The reason why Roan went through so much trouble was that he was not sure who was behind this matter. It was too dangerous to investigate openly, so it was most appropriate to investigate secretly. In this way, Roan could get rid of possible stalkers and prevent someone from finding his tracks and linking him to the investigation of Javara's disappearance. Before leaving Las Vegas, Roan went to the supermarket and the pharmacy to buy some things and disguised himself, Mona, and Caroline. The three people who successfully arrived in Germany could no longer be seen in their original appearance, and the names on their IDs were changed to Andrew, Anna, and Leah. In a hotel in Munich, Roan checked into a room with Mona and Caroline under the envious and jealous eyes of passers-by, and then walked in with his luggage. Okay, we have successfully arrived in Munich, and it's time to investigate. Roan threw his luggage on the ground, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains, turned around and asked, Caroline, where is your piano store exactly? Because he was not sure if anyone was watching the piano store, Roan planned to check it out tonight, and then decide how to enter the piano store to retrieve the box, based on the situation. It's not far from Goth Square. Caroline took out a piece of paper and wrote down the specific address and handed it to Roan, then threw her luggage aside, picked up a few clothes, and went into the shower room to take a shower. Out of caution and safety considerations, the three of them basically stayed in the same room all the way. At first, they were a little uncomfortable, but as time went by, there were fewer embarrassing things and feelings. During this period, Roan and Mona discovered Caroline's problem. This woman is arrogant and loves cleanliness. She gets angry if she doesn't take a shower for a day. Roan couldn't do it, so Mona was more direct and used physical means to persuade Caroline. Caroline only knew some basic women's self-defense skills and couldn't beat Mona at all. With tears in her eyes and aggrieved, she has been much less irritable since then, but every time she has the opportunity to take a shower, she still rushes to be the first one, no matter how Mona threatens her. Selectively ignoring the sound of water coming from the shower, Luo An called the hotel front desk to send up some food, then looked at Mona and said, "Your father's public identity in Europe is a small antique dealer. You can check his personal information, consumption records, itinerary, etc. to see if you can find any useful clues." "No problem." Mona nodded, took out a newly bought high-end laptop from her luggage, and began to type on the keyboard to investigate. "Oh, by the way, there is one more thing." Luo An suddenly slapped his head and said, "You will find an institution that can do DNA testing and make an appointment for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow." Mona looked up with a puzzled look on her face. "What do you mean?" Luo An touched his chin, indicating that he planned to take the severed hand and Mona to do a paternity test to see if the hand was really Javarie Evans's. Roan had never met Javarie Evans and didn't know what his hand looked like. Mona hadn't seen her father for a long time. The news that the severed hand belonged to Javarie Evans came from Caroline. Just in case, a DNA test would be correct. Mona nodded silently and continued to type on the keyboard. Soon the hotel delivered the food to the room. Roan simply ate some food, took Caroline's piano key, left the hotel, and went to Goth Square. 10 minutes later, Caroline finished her shower, wearing long sleeves and long pants, and walked out while drying her hair. Seeing that there was no one in the room, Caroline sat next to the food, picked up a sausage, and asked while eating, "Ron has gone to the piano store?" Mona ignored her, and Caroline didn't care. After finishing the food on the table, she walked aside, picked up a notebook, and began to write translations between French, German and English. Luo An knew Chinese and Japanese. After all, he had prepared to go to an island country in his previous life, and had taught himself Japanese. After coming to the Federation, he learned English. However, Luo An really did not understand French and German. But this time he was in Europe. Although he could use English, it was not very convenient at times. It happened that Caroline knew the languages of almost all European countries, so Luo An asked her to help him teach him French and German. Caroline did not think that Luo An could learn much in such a short time, but if he could learn a little, it might be useful at a critical moment. So Caroline began to write down words and sentences in a notebook and teach Luo An little by little. But what Caroline did not expect was that Luo An's memory was extremely amazing. In less than a week, he had memorized 80% of the words and sentences that Caroline taught him. Although there were problems with stuck and missing words, it was enough for daily communication. Caroline lowered her head and wrote the words she was going to teach today in her notebook, thinking of a scene where Ron used French and German to communicate with her at the beginning, but later his sentences became more and more fluent, and he even learned some words and sentences from classical literature. Caroline glanced at Mona, and an indescribable complex look flashed in her eyes. Feeling Caroline's gaze, Mona frowned and looked up. Seeing this, Caroline immediately lowered her head to write again, but just sighed slightly. On the other side, Ron quickly arrived at the piano store near Goth Square. He did not immediately take the key to open the door and go in, but bought a cup of coffee, sat on a chair, and read the newspaper casually. As Ron expected, someone had been secretly observing the piano store in a room on the upper floor of a store diagonally opposite the piano store. The view from that location was very good, which was very suitable for surveillance. Because he was not sure of the other party's identity, in order not to alert the enemy, Luo An did not go upstairs to have a friendly exchange with the other party. Instead, he took advantage of the sun setting and the other party's change of people, drank a bottle of featherfall potion, climbed from the roof of the third floor to the second floor window behind the piano room, and sneaked in again along the roof after finding the box. The next day, with the help of the chick, Luo An and Mona got the DNA test report of the severed hand that afternoon. The report showed that the blood test result of the owner of the severed hand and Mona reached 99.99%, which could confirm that the other party and Mona had a parent-child relationship. Seeing this result, Mona's face looked very bad. Luo An put his arm around her waist, whispered a few words of comfort, and then said, "Next, we will investigate the reason for your father's disappearance. If we find out the last mission he performed before he disappeared, we should be able to find him. By the way, I found something." Mona nodded, put the test report aside, tapped the computer a few times and said, "My father's consumption records show that he has purchased high-end cosmetics, flowers, and hotel rooms many times. I checked the hotel and found that he would go to the hotel with a woman every once in a while to book a room." Luo An scratched his head and did not comment on Javari Evans' private life. He looked down at the photo of the woman that Mona found. Before he finished looking at it, Caroline next to him suddenly exclaimed, "I've seen this woman. I saw her at a cocktail party. What does she do? Sorry, I forgot, but I remember that she is very rich and a widow." X2. Chapter 422. Mrs. Hanover, the exploding safe house. Vienna, the capital of Austria. As the world's famous music capital, Vienna has always been known as the center of art and gorgeous Baroque architecture. It is the city with the highest quality of life in the world, and the famous Golden Hall is located here. In the evening, Isabella Hanover, who is nearly 50 years old, but has a proud temperament, and is wearing a brand new high-end dress, listened to the music played in the hall, socialized with others for a while, and returned to her car under the escort of bodyguards. Sitting in the back seat of the Bentley Continental, the car slowly started, and drove forward as usual. Isabella Hanover, who was lowering her head to touch up her makeup, suddenly frowned and found that the car was going in the wrong direction. Slowly closing the macup box, she looked up at the driver and asked calmly, "Who are you? Where is my driver?" "Good evening, Mrs. Hanover. Your driver is in the trunk of the car. He is fine. He just fainted." Roan drove the car slowly to a villa in the suburbs of Vienna and explained in a calm tone, "It's a bit urgent. Please forgive me for being too direct this time." Roan had asked Mona to investigate Isabella Hanover's information before and found out that she was born in a noble family in Europe and her husband was also an old European noble who died of cancer a few years ago. Roan didn't look up to these so-called nobles and didn't feel much for them, but it was not easy to meet them. Caroline said before that she could try to contact Isabella Hanover, and then her private secretary arranged the meeting time for a month later. Since the official channels were not working, Roan was too lazy to talk nonsense. He asked Mona to find out Isabella Hanover's schedule for the next few days, and then arrived at the parking lot outside the Vienna Golden Hall at night, knocked the driver unconscious, and stuffed him into the trunk. "This is one of my estates." Mrs. Hanover did not show any worry or fear. Seeing that the scenery outside the car window was gradually becoming familiar, she calmly pressed the button on the cosmetics, looked at Roan who was driving carefully, and asked, "What are you looking for me tonight? What do you want to do? Our target is not you, Mrs. Hanover." Roan drove the car into the villa area, followed by a beetle, and slowly parked the car at the door of the guest building. Roan got out of the car, opened the back door, handed her his hand, and explained, "Mr. Gillett is missing, and we hope to get some clues about him from you." Gillett is a name that Javarie Evans disguised himself as in Europe. "Gillett is missing?" Putting her hand in Roan's, Mrs. Hanover slowly walked out of the backseat of the car, tilted her head to look at the beetle behind, and two young women got out of it. One woman was carrying a computer that she had never seen before, and the other woman looked familiar to her. Mrs. Hanover frowned and thought for a few seconds, then said, "I seem to have seen you somewhere." The woman that Mrs. Hanover felt familiar with was Caroline. Today, only Roan and Mona did some disguise macup, but Caroline did not. When she heard what the other party said, she smiled and said the name of a charity dinner, indicating that they had met at that time. "Okay." Mrs. Hanover nodded, turned and walked into the villa hall, saying as she walked, "I haven't contacted Gillett for a long time. I thought he was like some men, getting tired of the old and looking for other women, but I didn't expect that he was missing. It's really a complicated news for women." Luo An followed him into the guest building, took 2 wine glasses, and ordered some wine, handed a glass to Mrs. Hanover, took a sip himself, and then said that he suspected that Mr. Gillett had buried some clues in Isabella Hanover and wanted to look for it. According to Mona's investigation, Javarie Evans often went in and out of this villa, and it is very likely that he has hidden things here. "Okay, you guys are welcome." Mrs. Hanover sat on the sofa and took the wine glass and nodded, saying some places that Javarie often went to. Luo An gave Mona next to him a look, first handed the computer that Javarie had touched to Mona, and then went upstairs again to look for it. Seeing Mona lowering her head to fiddle with the computer, Mrs. Hanover turned her eyes to Caroline, who was doing nothing, and asked with a smile, "What is your relationship with Gillett?" "I'm his adopted daughter, and they are the private detectives I hired at a high price." According to Roan's instructions before the operation, Caroline revealed her identity, on the one hand, to gain Isabella Hanover's trust, and on the other hand, to cover up Roan and Mona. "Adopted daughter?" Mrs. Hanover frowned slightly when she heard this, and looked at Caroline carefully for a few times. She snorted and said, "It seems that Gillett has told me a lot of lies. Men's mouths are like this." Caroline smiled and answered the other party. The two continued to chat slowly. At the same time, Roan found several books that were placed in a special way in a study on the second floor of the villa. Opening the book, Roan found some old landscape photos with names marked below. After listing and piecing them together, he found that the numbers and letters in these names formed several longitude and latitude coordinates. After searching for a while, Roan returned to the first floor without finding anything useful. He gave the longitude and latitude coordinates to Mona for her to investigate. He looked up and found that Caroline and Mrs. Hanover had moved to the window to chat. Roan picked up the wine glass and walked to the two of them. After a brief chat, he suddenly said, "Mrs. Hanover, it's too cold by the window. Let's go back to the sofa. In addition, I asked my companion to block the car and the private positioning signal you sent. The people you are waiting for will not come here in a short time. There is no need to wait and see." Caroline was stunned for a moment when she heard this. She subconsciously turned her head to look at Mrs. Hanover and found that her face changed slightly. The smile on her face quickly disappeared. She glared at Roan, stuffed the wine glass in her hand to Caroline, and turned back to sit on the sofa. Roan laughed and didn't care. He did this to delay time and find clues related to Javari Evans. What he lacked most now was time. He didn't want to waste time fighting with Mrs. Hanover's men first. Mrs. Hanover sat on the sofa and stopped talking. She just looked at Caroline quietly. Caroline was a little stiff under her stare, and she slowly forced out an unnatural smile on her face. Seeing this, Roan poured another glass of wine for Mrs. Hanover and handed it to her, blocking Mrs. Hanover's sight with his body. Mrs. Hanover took the glass, squinted at Roan for a few seconds, and said softly, "You don't look like a private detective. This shows that my disguise is very successful." Roan clinked the glass with Mrs. Hanover and smiled. "If people can tell that I'm a private detective at a glance, how can I survive in this industry? That makes sense." Hanover nodded without comment. At this moment, Mona next to him suddenly raised her hand. "Boss, I found something here." Roan and Caroline hurried over after hearing the words, and Mrs. Hanover also came over. She was also very curious about what Javari had hidden in his villa. These are the coordinates of a safe house, just on the other side of Vienna. Mona didn't keep him in suspense, and directly put a picture of a house on the computer screen. But before Luo An could speak, Mona put another picture of ruins on the computer screen, and continued with a sullen face. "But this safe house was destroyed 11 days ago." The case report of the Vienna police stated that the house was blown up by high explosives. 11 days ago. Luo An looked at Caroline, who frowned. "I started to lose contact with my father from that day." Chapter 423, Discovery of the Safe House, Disk in the Hotel. High explosives? Looking at the information on Mona's computer, Mrs. Hanover frowned, turned to look at Roan, and asked in a serious tone, "Who is Gelert? Who are you?" Normal people would not use the term safe house, nor would they associate it with something like high explosives. At the same time, lights suddenly lit up in the distance of the villa, and the roar of several cars sounded from afar. Mrs. Hanover's security personnel finally found this place. "What is Mr. Gelert's identity?" It's more appropriate for him to answer this question himself. "As for me, I'm just an ordinary private detective." Roan smiled and replied to Mrs. Hanover, patting Mona and Caroline on the shoulders. The two women quickly put away their computers and other items and ran into the Bentley Continental outside. Mrs. Hanover was about to ask something, but Roan picked up the $100,000 bottle of Petra's red wine on the table, walked quickly to the Bentley Continental, waved at her with a smile, and said, "The wine is good. Thank you for your hospitality. Goodbye, Mrs. Hanover." After that, Roan got into the driver's seat of the Bentley Continental. The next second, the car roared suddenly, like a dark cheetah, flexibly shuttled through the pursuit and interception of several cars, and left the area in the blink of an eye. Damn it. The security director, who finally found the place with a large group of people, looked very ugly when he saw this scene. The butler, who rushed over, waved his hand to signal him to chase, and at the same time, ran quickly to Mrs. Hanover's side and asked nervously, "Madam, are you okay?" "No." Looking at the car lights gradually disappearing in the distance, Mrs. Hanover's mouth corners slightly raised, turned back to the villa, and said, "No need to chase. Let the people come back." The butler frowned slightly, but did not raise any objections. Mrs. Hanover thought for a while, then told the butler the names of Gelert and Caroline, and said, "Find out the relationship between them. In addition, Gelert is missing. Check this matter." "Okay, ma'am." In the distance, the Bentley Continental was moving left and right on the road, and soon left the following cars behind. Caroline in the passenger seat did not feel worried or afraid, because she was still not used to Roan's driving style. At this time, she was holding a bag that Roan had prepared for her in advance, and bowed her head to vomit. After vomiting a few times, Caroline turned pale and looked up and asked, "Roan, aren't you worried that Mrs. Hanover will have someone investigate my father's disappearance and alert the enemy?" "We want her to alert the enemy." Roan patted Caroline's back gently. Mrs. Hanover was a wealthy old-fashioned aristocrat with extensive connections. As long as she wanted, she would be able to find out something. Even if she alerted the enemy, she had the ability and confidence to protect herself. Roan and others didn't have such a big power, so they could just stand behind Mrs. Hanover to hide themselves and protect their safety, and at the same time, see who was alerted. Glancing at Caroline, Mona, who was sitting in the back seat of the car, holding a laptop, asked with a sullen face, "The safe house was blown up, and the clues are gone. I'm afraid that Mrs. Hanover won't have any clues in the short term." "Roan, what should we do next?" "Let's go back to the hotel first. I'll go to the ruins later and maybe find something," Roan replied casually, and then parked the Bentley Continental on a street in Vienna. The two women got out of the car immediately and walked to a small alley not far away as planned. Roan got out of the car and walked to the back of the Bentley Continental. He opened the trunk, and inside was a middle-aged white man wearing a white lining, with his mouth stuffed and a big nose tied up. He was the original driver of the car. When he saw Roan's face, he suddenly widened his eyes and cried, "Don't cry." Roan took off his suit jacket, which was originally the other person's, and threw it back to him, smiling. "The car is good, but the gas is running out. Remember to refuel later." After that, Roan took out a dagger and threw it to the other person, then turned and left, and walked towards the alley not far away. At the end of the alley, there was a car that had been prepared. Mona and Caroline waited for a moment, and Roan got in the driver's seat, started the car and left. The car slowly stopped next to the hotel. Caroline covered her mouth and ran out of the car again. Roan looked at her speechlessly, turned back and said to Mona, "You go back to the room first and check your father's consumption records to see if there are any other clues. I'll go to the safe house and come back later." "Okay." Mona got out of the car holding the laptop, and Roan stepped on the accelerator and drove the car to the other side of Vienna. 10 minutes later, Roan arrived at the safe house and found that the scene there was completely different from the scene in the photo. Not only had the bricks and garbage been cleared away, but it had even started to be rebuilt, and the building materials were ready. Roan walked around speechlessly, but didn't find anything useful, and didn't find anyone watching here, like he did last time at the piano store. Turning around and preparing to leave, Roan suddenly found that there was a locked house diagonally opposite the safe house, the most suitable location for monitoring the safe house. After a few seconds of hesitation, Luo An moved to the back of the house and looked inside through the glass. He keenly discovered that there were some hair-thin lines on the windows and the door. With a gleam in his eyes, he turned on emotional perception. Not finding any signs of people inside, Luo An immediately turned over and entered the room. Soon, he found a hidden secret room in the ordinary basement. There were some dusty weapons and bullets in the secret room, some photos and papers on the wall, and a computer that was out of power and could not be turned on. He is also a person who likes to play nesting dolls. Luo An laughed, found a pocket, put all these things away, and took them back to the hotel. Just after returning to the hotel room, before Luo An could speak, Mona, who was sitting with Caroline, suddenly looked up and said loudly, "Luo An, I found a new clue here." Luo An took the things he had just found aside, walked to Mona and asked, "What clue?" Mona said that Caroline had just discovered that Java's consumption records showed that every time he and Mrs. Hanover went to the hotel, it was the day after he called Caroline. Java would not tell Caroline what his specific mission was each time, but he would say that he was going on a business trip. Mona hacked into the hotel system and checked the records. She found that Java would normally use his own ID to check in, but the day before each business trip, he would check in under the name of Mrs. Hanover, and Java would handle the storage business at the hotel. "Mona, can you edit a few words using the voice of the hotel manager?" Mona was stunned for a moment, then nodded suddenly and said, "No problem." When Mona was ready, Roan took out his mobile phone and called the hotel manager, saying that he was a regional manager of a multinational company and was going to book a banquet at the hotel. He discussed with the hotel manager whether the hotel had time to host it. 2 hours later, through Mona's editing and forged audio of the hotel manager's speech, the hotel front desk accepted Roan's identity as Javary's secretary, took Roan into the semi-basement of the hotel, and handed over the items that Javary had deposited to him. The thing was not big, just a disk in a box. Mona used the driver to open the disk. After a moment, she said in doubt, "Luo An, the things in the disk and the computer you brought back are all new tasks my father received some time ago. But the contents of the two files are very different." "No, the contents are roughly the same, but the logic is completely different. It can be said to be completely opposite." Chapter 424, The Authenticity of the Document. Return to Munich, piano store, Vienna, a hotel room. After handing the disk to Mona, Luo An sat next to her and sorted out the items he had found in the house next to the safe house. In two of the boxes, Luo An found two P9S pistols equipped with silencers. P9S, one of the world's most famous pistols, is famous not only for its high shooting accuracy and high reliability, but also for its use of a rifle-style roller blocking device, which makes the muzzle shake very small at the moment of firing. Coupled with a silencer, it immediately became the world's top assassin's gun. Luo An liked these two pistols very much, but he took a quick look at them and put them aside because he found that the height of the box was wrong and there was something inside. He took out the soft cotton padding the pistols and found that there was indeed a layer underneath. After opening the layer, there were 3 miniature glass bottles in each of the two boxes, filled with milky white potions. Caroline, who had been sitting next to Roan, saw this and asked curiously, "What is this? Poison?" "Maybe." Roan picked up one of them and shook it. There was no text on the glass bottle, and he couldn't guess what the milky white liquid inside was. At this moment, Mona, who was sitting at the table not far away, figured out the contents of the disk and called Roan to check it out in surprise. Logically opposite, Roan quickly moved to Mona's side and bent down to look at the computer screen. Just as Mona said, the contents of the two files were roughly the same, and both introduced a criminal organization. The organization's main business is human trafficking. Every year, it transports more than 100,000 women and children from South America, the Middle East, East Asia, Africa and other places to Western Europe and other places around the world for leisure industries. At the same time, the organization is also involved in side businesses such as human bone trading, counterfeit drugs, smuggling, and money laundering. Some time ago, an agent of the Commonwealth who had infiltrated the organization was exposed and betrayed, and gave out a lot of information, which put a large number of agents in danger, and even implicated the CIA, because wherever there is chaos, there are CIA members, and they have also buried people in this criminal organization. The CIA does not care what the Commonwealth thinks. The CIA, which has lost a lot of people, now only wants to get rid of the traitor, so this task was assigned to Jory Evans, who has submitted a retirement application and agreed to do the last mission. These are the information in the disk that Roan found. The task requires Jory to lead the team to eliminate the traitor. But the files in the basement computer show that Jory knew the traitorous agent when he was young, and the injured agent also had his friends. Upon learning about this, Jory took the initiative to apply for the task of eliminating the traitor and rescue other trapped CIA agents. After repeated consideration, the CIA headquarters agreed to Jory's request and gave him some necessary information, as well as a specific action plan and instructions for the next step. X3 in front of the computer, Caroline looked left and right with a puzzled look on her face, not understanding what was going on with the two documents. Mona was confused, and she couldn't figure out which one was real and which one was fake for a moment. She subconsciously raised her head and turned her gaze to Luo An. Luo An rested his chin on his hand and pondered for a while, then suddenly chuckled and said, "Download the files on the laptop and put them aside. We will focus on the files on the disk next." Caroline suddenly realized, "You mean, the files on the disk are real? What about the files on the laptop?" "No, I suspect both files are fake." Luo An shook his head gently, but did not explain in detail to Caroline, who was scratching her head. He just said casually, "In this situation, distinguishing between true and false is not the most important thing. Choosing which one to use as the next action plan is the first priority." Mona was silent for a few seconds, then a gleam of light flashed in her eyes. After she sorted out the files on the disk, she looked at the information on the traitors and criminal organizations inside and asked, what should we do next? Although we now know what the mission of Jolly is, we still don't know where he is now, whether he is alive or dead. How to find him, and where to find him are the key issues. Go back to Germany, and go to the piano store. Luo An patted Mona on the shoulder, looked at Caroline, and smiled. Don't forget, there are still clues in your piano store that we haven't checked. Mona nodded, and immediately stood up to pack up with Luo An. Caroline, who had been confused, was even more confused. Luo An, what are you talking about? Caroline didn't know the phrase Riddler get out of Gotham, but she now felt the mood of the person who said it. One day later, Munich, Germany. On a street not far from Goethe Square, a piano store with a decoration style that is very European in the last century, stands in front of a group of tourists. Because the boss is not there, the piano store has been closed for a long time. Many tourists who want to go in for a tour feel a little regretful. In a room on the third floor diagonally opposite the piano store, two white people wearing casual sportswear also feel very irritated. The two have been observing the piano store here for many days, but have not found anything. The boss doesn't let them go back, so they can only wait here boringly. Fortunately, there are two of them, so they can switch positions every once in a while, and the boss is not short of money, so he gave them a lot of funds, so that they can also order food delivery, and have afternoon tea, which can be regarded as a relaxation and rest. So, your target is them. In a high-end coffee shop on the other side of Goethe Square, Caroline finally figured out the target of Luo An's trip. After thinking about it, she asked with some concern, how do you judge that these two people are not from the CIA? If they are not from the CIA, who are they? Also, if you take action against them, will it alert the enemy? The CIA's surveillance level is not that bad. We will know who they are later. Luo An laughed, then patted the P9's pistol hidden in his clothes, and said to Caroline, as for alerting the enemy, it is certain, but I have found someone to take the blame. At this time, a waitress in the coffee shop walked out with a paper bag of a delivery order. Luo An, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately walked to her side, and said in German, that she was a friend of the person who placed the order, and she didn't need to deliver the food. The waitress was a little bit unconvinced, but after Luo An stuffed her with a €5 tip, the waitress smiled and handed the paper bag to Luo An, and said that she had a pleasant meal. He took the paper bag, and walked to a room downstairs diagonally opposite the piano store. Mona, who had been waiting for a long time, helped Luo An put on the same clothes as the coffee shop waiter that she had prepared in advance. Then Luo An walked up the stairs, walked to the door of the room, knocked on the door, and said in German, hello, the afternoon tea you ordered is here. The two people in the room frowned slightly when they heard the man's voice, and looked at each other. One of the white men with a crew cut took out a pistol from his waist and slowly moved to the door of the room. He did not open the door immediately and asked, why did you change people? Where is the original waitress? She took my job and was transferred by the boss to be responsible for collecting money. Luo An said impatiently, can I collect the food? I still have to deliver food to other places. Wait a minute. The man with a crew cut still did not open the door. He walked to the landline phone in the room, picked up the phone, and called the coffee shop, asking the owner to confirm whether there was a person named Luo An. Roan, who was well prepared, had asked Mona to cut off the phone line in advance, so the buzzer cut man's call was actually made to Mona. But Mona didn't speak German, so Caroline, who spoke German, disguised herself as a coffee shop waiter and confirmed Roan's identity. After receiving a positive answer, the buzzer cut man let down his guard a little, but still didn't put down the gun. He just put the gun behind his back and opened the door of the room. Enjoy your meal. Roan spoke in German and handed the paper bag to the other party with a smile. Then, at the moment when the buzzer cut man reached out to take the paper bag, he took out a P9's pistol with a silencer from his waist. The buzzer cut man. Chapter 425, Bullet Enchantment, Important Clues Obtained, Monaco. Ever since he got the sleeping potion and weakness potion, Luo An has been thinking about how to use them. Sleeping potion is okay. It can be used when you have insomnia, but Luo An has never had any idea how to use weakness potion. Until a few days ago, Luo An suddenly had an idea. He bought a few acupuncture needles, soaked the needles in the sleeping potion for a few minutes, and then pricked his arm. Soon, a wave of sleepiness came to Luo An's head, and he didn't have a chance to resist, and fell into a deep sleep. More than 20 minutes later, Luo An woke up, and looked at the pistol and bullets on the table, with a kind smile on his face. The moment he saw Luo An take out the P9's pistol, the short-haired man's pupils shrank, and he quickly threw the paper bag to Luo An, and immediately took out the pistol behind him. Puff, puff, puff. But Luo An was faster than him. He fired 3 shots without hesitation. With the muffled sound of bullets passing through the silencer, the man with the short hair was shot in the right hand, right arm and right shoulder, splashing 3 red flowers of blood. Then Luo An kicked the man with the short hair in the stomach, kicked him into the room, and smashed the coffee table not far away into pieces. The silencer does not completely eliminate the sound of the gun, but only reduces the decibels. Therefore, the other white man in sportswear who had been guarding the window heard the sound immediately when Luo An fired. The white man in sportswear changed his face, quickly took out the pistol from his waist, turned around, and prepared to fire back. The second after Luo An kicked the man with the short hair away, he moved to the inside of the room at a ghostly speed. As soon as the white man in sportswear turned around and raised his gun, Luo An pulled the trigger of the P9's pistol again. Puff, puff. 3 blood flowers bloomed from the right hand and left leg of the white man in sportswear holding the gun. He roared as he could not hold the gun, suppressed the pain from his left leg, and rushed towards Luo An. The man with a short haircut who smashed the coffee table also injured the pain in his right arm, got up from the ground, and rushed towards Luo An with his fists. Suddenly, the two of them suddenly felt their legs and waists weak, as if they had been drained of all their strength, after fighting 10 times in a row. Before they could reach Luo An, the two of them turned pale, leaned forward and fell to the ground. Then, their eyelids fought wildly, and an uncontrollable sleepiness surged into their heads, leaving them no chance to resist. In the blink of an eye, they fell into a deep sleep. Looking at the two guys lying on the ground and snoring in front of him, Luo An blew the port of the silencer and laughed. Sure enough, enchantment is the correct way to open these 2 potions. Then Luo An took out another pistol without enchanting the bullets, and fired a few shots at the wall and the ground where the man in the suit had just stood in the room. There was no other intention, just to let the bullet of this P9's pistol leave a trace here, so that the people who came to investigate would know what weapon Roan used. Mona and Caroline, who walked into the room, were dumbfounded and shocked when they saw this scene. Roan did not give them a chance to ask questions, and quickly put away his pistol, motioning them to simply treat the wounds of the 2 snoring guys. After stuffing the 2 into the backseat of the car, Roan quickly dealt with the bloodstains and personal belongings in the room in the style of the CIA, leaving no grass growing wherever he went, and then drove away from the scene quickly with Mona and Caroline. In the basement of an ordinary house far outside Munich, the 2 people were tied to 2 chairs in 2 rooms respectively. Looking at Caroline, who was excited when she tied the 2 with a rope, Roan's eyes flashed with a strange color, as if he had discovered something. Although ordinary bullets are waterproof, they cannot be used after being soaked for more than 24 hours. For the sake of caution and safety, Roan only soaked the bullets in the P9's pistol in sleeping potion and weakness potion for more than 2 hours. This means that the 2 drugs don't take too long to work. After more than an hour, the buzz-cut man and the sportswear man woke up from their chairs. I found out the identities of these 2 people. Without rushing to ask questions, Luo An asked Mona to check the 2 people's situation first, and learned that they were called Hans and Fuchs, German and Czech respectively. They had no experience of going to prison for further studies, not because they had never committed any illegal acts, but because they were listed as the primary suspects in first-degree murder, intentional homicide and other cases several times. But they did things cleanly, had professionals to help them clean up, and someone hired a professional lawyer for them, which allowed them to stay at large. After waking up, the 2 had not fully recovered. Although they were angry and scared about being tied to the chair, they had no strength to struggle. Mona and Caroline both wore masks on their faces. Caroline briefly introduced the identities of the two in German. Luo An took a dagger and walked into the room, where Hans was first. Neither of them was a strong-willed guy, and both of them had killed many people, so Roan's interrogation this time was relatively direct. He first took out a bottle of sensitive medicine and poured it into the two people's mouths to amplify their senses and sensitivity to pain, and then Roan directly used physical means to chat with them. During this period, Roan also discovered what the bottles of milky white liquid found in the two gun boxes were, the CIA's specially made enhanced version of truth serum. Under the combined effects of the sensitive medicine and the enhanced version of truth serum, the two soon told everything they knew, and even admitted to all crimes such as intentional homicide. But the news about Javari Evans, that Roan and the other two wanted to know the most, but the two knew nothing. No matter how Roan asked, the two said they had never heard of this name. After exchanging a glance with Caroline and Mona, Roan immediately asked, "Who sent you to spy on the piano store?" Boss. What's your boss's name?" "Robert Bernikoff." Roan turned his head to look at Mona, who immediately turned on the computer and typed on the keyboard to look up the name. Seeing this, Roan then asked, "Where is your boss now?" "I don't know." With the exact name and the more information Roan got from the two, Mona quickly found the information about this Robert Bernikoff. Robert Bernikoff, 43 years old, Czech, owned several companies and is a wealthy man. In the living room of the house above the basement, Mona looked at the information in the computer with a gloomy face and said, "I found the personal information of Robert Bernikoff investigated by the CIA in the disk file. It shows that he is a wealthy man on the surface, but secretly he is one of the three heads of the international criminal organization in the European region, mainly responsible for the business around the Mediterranean. The rebellious agent may have been working under his men after the rebellion." Luo An pondered for a while, then asked, "Does the disk contain your father's thoughts on him?" "No, but Robert Bernikoff's name is marked in red." Mona tapped on the keyboard with her 10 fingers for a few seconds, suddenly looked up and said, "Robert Bernikoff's arm was injured a few days ago. The time between his injury and the time when my father lost contact was less than a day." "Wow, what an amazing coincidence." Luo An grabbed the rope that Caroline had been fiddling with, thought for a moment, and asked, "Can you find out where Robert Bernikoff is now?" "Of course." Mona tapped the keyboard a few times, showed the computer screen to Roan, and said, "It's in the south of France, Monaco." Roan nodded with satisfaction, walked towards the basement with a pistol, and said as he walked, "Go back and pack up. We'll go to Monaco tomorrow." "Wait a minute, I have a question. A very serious question." At this moment, Caroline suddenly raised her hand loudly, and when she saw Roan and Mona looking at her, she said seriously, "If we go to Monaco to find someone, we need to calculate and discuss the money issue first. A bottle of Coke there costs $6. X2. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.